After 3 years of engagement, Judith suddenly wanted to break up. It wasn't because of any major incident, just that her fiancé and her best friend had fallen for the same woman. She found it laughable, so she didn't even bother saying goodbye to them. A plane ticket, leaving without hesitation. Hello, everyone, welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful stories every day. Now the story begins. Judith, congratulations on receiving the University of Pennsylvania's offer. You're the only one from the entire finance department at Nanjing University. Judith replied respectfully. Thank you, Mr. Green. Without your recommendation letter, I wouldn't have gotten this opportunity. After exchanging a few more words, the teacher and student ended their call. After that, Judith booked a flight ticket for a month later and flipped the calendar on the coffee table. Just as she was circling the departure date, the door suddenly opened. Judith looked over quietly. It was indeed Ellis, dressed in a suit. His figure was handsome and upright, his hair meticulously groomed. He showed no expression, his tone indifferent. Why didn't you even turn on the lights? Judith countered with a question instead of answering. Did the case negotiations go smoothly? Ellis is now an intern at Redstone Law Firm, ranked number 1 nationwide, and has already started handling cases formally in just his second month. He left with a remark piece of cake before walking into the bathroom. From the moment they got together, Ellis had maintained this aloof attitude. Without Judith's enthusiasm, their relationship grew even colder. Hearing the sound of running water from the bathroom, Judith subconsciously got up to make a cup of milk, only to realize what she was doing and laugh at herself mockingly. Before bed, Ellis always drank a cup of milk to calm his nerves, living with him for nearly 3 years. Some things had become habits. Judith still placed the milk on the bedside table. At that moment, Ellis's phone on the table lit up with a message. Senior, thank you so much for taking the time to help me today despite being so busy. The sender is Marsha. Judith paused for a moment before picking up her phone to check. The chat window also displayed a call record. Lasting nearly an hour, Judith remained silent for a few seconds. Ellis was the renowned top student in the law department. Marsha wasn't the first girl who used studying as an excuse to get close to him, but she was the only one who succeeded. Before this, Judith had truly believed she was Ellis's one and only. Due to their family's connections, she and Ellis had been engaged 3 years prior, because it was love at first sight. Judith almost recklessly plunged into this marriage before love arrangement. Not long after starting university, the two rented an apartment together off campus. Judith loved Ellis, so she took care of countless daily chores, hoping to bind him with tenderness. Her fiancé was outstanding, handsome, remarkably capable, and perfectly matched to her social standing. Speaking of this relationship, the former Judith was quite content, until last year, during her junior year, when freshman Marsha appeared. Ellis and Marsha worked together in the student council. In just half a year, his cold, rigid attitude and principles, everything could be broken for Marsha. Thinking of this, Judith sighed and put down his phone. For the past 6 months, she had too many unspoken words, all blocked by Ellis's indifferent gaze. But now, whether there was an answer or not no longer mattered to her. She, Judith, was never the type to cling desperately. Ellis came out to find Judith sitting on the bed reading a book, her expression as calm as ever. He drank the milk and said expressionlessly, "Not enough sugar." Judith didn't respond. Ellis frowned. "Why aren't you saying anything?" Judith looked up, saw Ellis's displeased expression, and instinctively replied, "I'll pay attention next time." "Forget it." He set the cup down. "No need to make it any more." Judith felt a tremor in her heart. "Why?" Ellis pulled back the covers and got into bed, replying casually, "Don't feel like drinking it anymore. Someone said it's too childish." Judith's heart trembled again. She knew clearly Ellis was the kind of person who would turn sour at the slightest criticism from ordinary people. Snide remarks and were the least of it. But now, his years-long habit was about to change because of what could be considered an offensive remark. Apart from Marsha, Judith couldn't think of anyone else who would say such a thing. Judith withdrew her gaze and nodded. "All right." As she was about to turn off the light, Ellis was still looking at his phone, out of the corner of her eye. She could see Marsha's pink pig avatar. Judith felt she shouldn't care anymore, yet her heart still ached. She took a quiet breath and said, "I'm turning off the light." Ellis frowned slightly, his fingers never pausing. Judith turned off the light and said, "Good night." Ellis didn't respond. Judith said nothing more, turning over to sleep with her back to him. The next morning, Judith got up to prepare breakfast. She had always loved studying recipes and believed cooking for someone she cared about was a joyful thing. Even though Ellis had never given any enthusiastic feedback, for the past 6 months, noticing Ellis's changes, Judith had been varying the flavors and combinations of meals even more. Having made the decision to leave just yesterday, Judith prepared a simple fried egg sandwich today. Ellis noticed nothing unusual and left directly after eating. He didn't say where he was going. Judith didn't press him as she usually would. For once, she set aside all her gloom, curled up on the sofa with a book, until a phone call interrupted her thoughts. The caller was Fabian, her childhood friend, also, the best friend she once had. Before Marcia came along, Judith sighed and answered the call. Hello, what's up? It's Marcia's birthday tonight, and I haven't bought her a gift yet. Come with me to help me pick something out, just from the sound of it. You could tell Fabian was smiling. Judith remained expressionless and retorted, You've given gifts to so many women, yet you don't know what to get Marcia. Fabian said, How could they be the same? How can you compare them to Marcia? Fine, not wanting to hear any more, Judith agreed outright. Judith arrived at the mall quickly. Fabian was over 10 minutes late. With peach blossom eyes, a straight nose, and thin lips, he had the quintessential face of a playboy. He was walking while making a WeChat call. Judith could clearly hear Marcia's voice. Fabian Sr., don't forget to come to my birthday party tonight. Alright, Fabian smiled gently. At that moment, a voice came through the phone saying, Just stick the things here. Judith froze. It was Ellis's voice. So the reason he had rushed out in such a hurry this morning was Marcia's birthday party. Wait Fabian until he finished the call before frowning and complaining to Judith. Can you keep your fiancé in check? Tell him to stop hovering around Marcia. They say rivals know each other best, and Fabian naturally recognized Ellis's voice. Here we go again, two men fighting over a woman, squeezing her in the middle. Judith couldn't be bothered to respond and walked straight ahead. Why are you walking so fast? Fabian caught up in a few steps, his tone unfriendly. Marcia said she wants you to come to her birthday party too. Judith replied with a flat expression and tone, I don't want to go. Fabian frowned again. Marcia already let go of what happened last time. Why are you still being so petty? He was referring to when Marcia had falsely accused Judith of deliberately losing her student council campaign speech, and both Ellis and Fabian had believed her without question. Judith felt a tightness in her chest. Fine, let's go then, after the matter was settled. Fabian carefully selected a bag worth over 100,000. After purchasing it, he sighed and said, Although Marcia always says she doesn't want me to spend too much, I still want to give her the best. Judith thought to herself, yet she never saw Marcia refuse to accept it. She couldn't be bothered to reply and just bought a crystal ball for a few dozen bucks. As time was almost up, the two headed to Marcia's small villa where the party was being held. The moment they pushed the door open, both froze in shock. Right in the center of the living room, Marcia was in Ellis's arms, Ellis's hand resting on her waist, their posture undeniably intimate. Judith always felt she was mentally prepared enough, yet seeing this scene still stung. But Fabian reacted more strongly than her, immediately furrowing his brows and scolding. What are you doing? Marcia quickly pulled away from Ellis's embrace, her face flushed red as she flusteredly explained, I almost fell just now. But Senior Ellis caught me. Ellis, however, remained completely unruffled. Fabian's expression remained unpleasant as he said irritably to Judith, I told you to keep an eye on your fiancé. Judith, who had been examining the private room's decor, shifted her gaze to Ellis at his words. The man took off his suit jacket, swept his hair back to reveal his forehead, looking efficient and handsome. Someone who rarely did housework at home was now bustling around for Marcia's birthday party. Judith curled her lips with a hint of mockery. Didn't I say it was an accident? Fabian snorted, momentarily at a loss for words. Marcia accepted the gifts from Fabian and Judith, looking utterly delighted. She even cradled the crystal ball from Judith, making a wish with exaggerated solemnity. I hope the people I love will always stay by my side. Judith noticed the two men wore identical expressions, both clearly thinking Marcia was referring to themselves. She found it amusing and actually laughed out loud. After Marcia made her wish, she also spoke quite solemnly. Alright, since the gift is from me, I'll definitely make your wish come true. Before long, all the party guests had arrived. Marcia's birthday celebration was quite grand, clearly showcasing her popularity. At the end of the party, all the lights went out. Ellis pushed out the cake with a faint smile on his face. This is a cake I made myself. Happy birthday to you. Judith stood frozen in place. Ellis, since when did this young master ever cook? On her previous birthdays, no matter how much she coquettishly pleaded, Ellis never even made her a simple bowl of plain noodles. Judith watched, suddenly unable to articulate what she was feeling. Yet strangely, the expected heartache didn't come as intensely as imagined. Meanwhile, Fabian let out a cold laugh and remarked, Ellis, I've never seen you care this much about Judith before. Fabian certainly wasn't worrying about her, he just couldn't bear seeing the designer bag he'd gifted being upstaged by Ellis's cake, so he deliberately spoiled the mood. Ellis retorted coldly, My relationship with Judith is none of your concern. Marcia chimed in sweetly, Senior Fabian, Don't say that. Senior Ellis makes a wonderful boyfriend. 3 people make a drama. Yet Judith remained silent throughout. After the birthday party, Judith and Ellis went home together. No one mentioned what happened at the party again, and the two reverted to their usual selves at home. Ellis was in the study, Judith in the living room, each keeping to themselves. Judith was originally using her tablet to contact her master's advisor at the University of Pennsylvania to prepare for her future thesis topic selection. Suddenly, a message popped up from Marcia, Ellis Sr. I had a fight with my roommate and ran out of the dorm. It's a bit late now, and I'm really scared. Can you come help me? It was probably because Ellis had logged into WeChat on the tablet while handling official business earlier and forgot to log out. Judith opened the chat window, waiting expressionlessly to see Ellis's reaction. He replied quickly, okay, wait for me at the school gate. Before long, Judith heard footsteps approaching from inside the room. Soon, the door was pulled open by Ellis. Judith looked up at him, his expression giving nothing away. He said, there's an urgent matter at the office. I need to step out. Span. Before Judith could respond, Ellis hurried away. Judith watched his retreating figure, her heart trembling with the sound of the closing door. This was no longer the first time, in Ellis's persistent boundary crossing. She could only feel a faint remnant of pain in her heart. Judith took a deep breath, logged out of Ellis's WeChat on her tablet, then sent emails to 3 advisors with her materials attached. Inquiring about their interest, if all went well, she would receive replies within the next few days. After finishing these tasks, Judith began packing up her belongings at home. 3 years ago, she had many plans for her future life with Ellis and bought all sorts of odds and ends, matching perfumes, couple sunglasses, his and hers mugs, photo frames meant for their pictures together. Because Ellis found them childish, none of these things were ever used. Judith sniffled and tossed them all into a cardboard box. Before, she had thought that with so much time, Ellis, no matter how cold he was, there would eventually come a day when she could melt his heart. Now she knew that he could indeed melt, just not for her. At midnight, Ellis finally returned home. Judith had fallen asleep reading a book but was awakened by the sound of his return. Ellis, as soon as he entered the room, Judith could smell the perfume on him that wasn't his own. Whenever Ellis visited Marcia, this scent would cling to him. Ellis might be oblivious to it, but Judith knew it was Marcia's deliberate way of leaving a mark to unsettle her. She opened her eyes and looked at him with little emotion. Back so soon? Ellis nodded and added, why does it feel like something's missing in the room? Yet after scanning the surroundings several times, he couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. Judith paused briefly before quickly laughing it off. Did some tidying up, threw away things we don't need anymore. Ellis said nothing more. He lowered his gaze and reached out his hand. His palm was wrapped with several layers of gauze, glaringly white under the light. My hand is injured. Judith couldn't quite describe his tone. It seemed indifferent yet carried a barely detectable hint of grievance. Ellis had a different constitution from others. His injuries took much longer to heal. She became very nervous upon noticing, meticulously treating every bruise and minor wound on his body. For over 2 years, she had been following various recipes to brew nourishing soups for him. In the past, Judith would have anxiously rushed over to ask endless questions, insisting on personally tending to his wounds before feeling at ease. But now she just watched for a while, asked nothing, and simply said, go take a shower. But be careful not to get the wound wet. Ellis paused for a moment before entering the bathroom. Not long after, he emerged from his shower and climbed into bed, still slightly damp. In the dim light, Ellis spoke up, Judith, I miss the soup you make. Judith opened her eyes and stared blankly at the drawn curtains. Ellis knew she was good to him, had always known, yet he only remembered her when he occasionally needed something. Or perhaps he'd finally sensed how unbecoming his behavior was for a fiancé, and out of rare guilt, softened his tone to make small talk with her. After reaching this conclusion, Judith replied in a flat voice, there are no ingredients at home. If you want some, go buy it outside. Ellis remained silent for a moment before replying, then let's go to the supermarket together. Half a year ago, this sentence would have made her jump for joy in bed. She had fantasized about going to the supermarket with Ellis countless times, yet it only materialized when she had given up. How laughable. Judith was about to refuse but then remembered she needed to stock up on international student survival essentials like hot pot base. Okay, seeing Judith agree, Ellis felt an inexplicable sense of relief in his heart. The next day, Ellis met Judith at the supermarket after work. Inside the supermarket, scattered couples walked hand in hand. While the two of them maintained a perfectly measured distance, Ellis pushed the cart as Judith walked beside him, tossing in hot pot seasoning and some basic condiments. Holding it, she remembered she would be leaving in a month, and feared the kitchen in that house would likely go unused. Just then, Ellis beside her suddenly stopped in his tracks. Judith looked up, following his gaze. There, standing in front of the shelf ahead, were two all too familiar figures, Marcia and Fabian. The two were chatting, laughing, and talking in perfect harmony. Judith saw Ellis's hands gripping the shopping cart tighten. Marcia turned her head at that moment and saw Judith and Ellis together. Her smile froze as she took a step back, causing the shopping cart to collide with a tower of promotional soaps nearby. Hundreds of soap bars instantly came crashing down toward Marcia. Ellis and Fabian both cried out in unison, "Watch out!" Fabian stepped forward to shield Marcia. But Judith's companion Ellis reacted faster. He immediately abandoned the shopping cart and sprinted toward Marcia. Marcia was instantly pulled into his protective embrace. The soap crashed to the ground with a spectacular and thunderous impact. Looking at the three people not far away, Judith turned slightly pale. Just now, Ellis had suddenly let go, causing the shopping cart to slam squarely into her waist. Judith picked up the item from the ground, rubbed her aching back, and slowly pushed the shopping cart forward. Ellis and Fabian exchanged glances, both wearing unpleasant expressions. Each held one of Marcia's arms, engaged in a subtle tug-of-war. From their first meeting 3 years ago, their relationship had never been good. Now that they'd fallen for the same woman, their rivalry had become even more intense. Judith, her back ached, yet she still found it laughable. Fabian frowned and took the first shot. "You were grocery shopping with Judith. Why bother meddling in our business?" Ellis smirked coldly and countered instead, "Are you and Marcia even on grocery shopping terms?" Seeing their conflict about to escalate, Marcia immediately reached out to intervene. She explained somewhat flustered, "Oh dear, stop arguing. Yesterday it was Ellis Sr. who helped me settle into my place, so today I thought I shouldn't trouble Ellis Sr. again. Luckily, Fabian Sr. was free and accompanied me to the supermarket to buy some daily necessities." Judith thought to herself, Marcia really knows how to play both sides, to have two men vying for her affection and to skillfully make use of their feelings. Fabian then looked at Judith and sneered, "Judith, you came just in time. Look at your fiancé, getting so worked up over another woman. Aren't you going to do something about it?" Judith sighed. At the beginning, she would still feel sad for these two people. Now, there was only helplessness and weariness. She smiled, the corners of her lips lifting slightly, and said, "Ellis, where would he need me to manage?" Ellis frowned, feeling somewhat strange. Then, a supermarket stock clerk came over and said with a headache, "They've already fallen over several times today." Marcia apologized repeatedly, squatting down to help pick them up. Fabian also hurriedly joined in picking them up. Seeing Judith standing still and remembering how she hadn't helped him earlier, his anger flared up. He asked irritably, "Why are you just standing there? Can't you see we're all helping?" Judith said indifferently, "My back hurts. I just got hit by a shopping cart." Ellis finally looked up at her, about to say something when Marcia let out a startled cry, interrupting him. Both he and Fabian immediately turned to her, asking anxiously, "What's wrong?" Marcia laughed sheepishly, "It's nothing. Just got a scratch from a box. It stings a little." Judith suddenly found it both ridiculous and dull. "I'm going to check out." She pushed the shopping cart away without looking back. Ellis caught up with her after she finished checking out. There was rare concern in his eyes. "Is your back all right?" Ellis's care and guilt were unusual for Judith, but now they failed to stir any ripples in her. Judith simply said, "Let's go home." The next day, Judith went to school to collect her academic records and other documents needed for studying abroad. As she stepped out of the office building, she received a call from Mr. Green. Mr. Green confirmed the documents with her and asked if she had arranged the flight tickets and accommodation. Judith curved her lips. "Almost everything is ready. I can leave as soon as the time comes." As soon as the words fell, Ellis's voice came from behind. "Where are you going?" Ellis's sudden appearance startled Judith. While she hesitated, Ellis walked up to her side, staring at her intently. Judith put away her phone and replied calmly, "I'll be going out with Mr. Green later for some fieldwork." He wanted to ask something more. Judith had already changed the subject. "What about you? Why are you at school too?" In this ridiculous four-person entanglement drama, she just wanted to quietly exit the stage without any complications or further involvement. Anyway, regarding her departure, Ellis would probably only feel relieved. He would no longer have to waver between an arranged marriage and genuine feelings. Ellis pondered for a moment before replying. "Marcia said the student council needed some materials. Since I was passing by, I came over." Passing by. Since when are the law offices on the south and north campuses along the same route? Every time she heard the name Marcia come out of Ellis's mouth, her resolve to leave grew a little stronger. The familiar ache in my heart had also grown faint. Judith smiled and said, "Got it. You should hurry to the student council then." With that, she walked away directly. Ellis watched Judith's retreating figure and slightly furrowed his brows. He always felt that Judith had been acting strange lately. In the end, He averted his gaze and headed to the student council. Marcia was drafting a proposal in the organization department's office. While Fabian leaned against the table beside her, the two standing quite close, Ellis frowned and was about to speak when he heard Marcia say with evident frustration, "If Senior Yi were here, she'd definitely handle this perfectly." Fabian immediately comforted her, saying, "Marcia, you're much more capable than her. Have confidence in yourself." Ellis also walked in and placed the materials Marcia needed on the table. He said, "Seniority and age can't be the absolute reasons why Judith is better than you." Fabian glared at him with an unfriendly gaze. At that moment, a girl raised her head from behind a pile of documents and spoke in disbelief. "Marcia is better than Judith. What are you talking about?" Ellis recognized this girl. She was May, the former head of the outreach department who had worked with Judith. May didn't give them a chance to speak, cutting in mercilessly. "Judith has ranked first in academics every year, now only a junior. She already has 2 first author papers in SCI core journals. And what about Marcia?" she sneered. "She's won some trivial school awards that rely more on social skills than merit, and you two are practically worshipping her for it, you shameless people. Others have brains too." With that, May ignored the three's ugly expressions, took her organized belongings, and left. At home, Judith received a call from May. Listening to her indignant tone, Judith found it both amusing and exasperating. "Those two guys are always fawning over Marcia all day long. I've long been sick of it. I'm used to it already." Judith typed on her computer while listening to the phone call. Just now, her first-choice advisor had replied, saying they'd meet after she arrived in Country M, and had sent her their research focus and required reading materials. This was essentially extending an olive branch to her. May paused before saying, I don't even know what to say. Are you really not going to tell them about studying abroad?" Judith's expression didn't change as she replied calmly, "There's nothing to say. Once I leave, it'll all be over." After hanging up, Judith continued reading research papers until she realized it was already 6 p.m. She threw together something to eat without giving Ellis a second thought. "I hadn't expected to hear the door open just as I sat down at the table." Judith looked up at him with some surprise. Ellis took off his suit jacket, hung it on the coat rack, and said, "Smells delicious." Judith remained seated and said, "Help yourself if you want some." Ellis paused for a moment before walking over to the dining table. "Would you like to go to Wufeng Mountain tomorrow? Didn't you say you wanted to hike through the flower fields there?" Judith froze in surprise. Every August, vast stretches of autumn chrysanthemums bloom across Wufeng Mountain, creating a breathtakingly beautiful sight. She wanted to go also because there was a Taoist temple on the mountain dedicated to the immortals of harmony and union, called the Temple of Harmony. Legend has it that hanging red paper on the temple's love tree can bring marital bliss and make wishes come true. In the past, she had so many visions for herself and Ellis. Judith curled her lips. "You suddenly have time this year." Once, she would bring it up every year. But each time Ellis would refuse her, citing being too busy with studies. Ellis said casually, "Yeah, the case I was handling is finished. I have a few days off, we can go together." Judith thought for a moment, then nodded. All right. After all, it was a place she had always wanted to visit. Once they went abroad, who knew when they'd have another chance to go? Seeing her agreement, Ellis stepped into the kitchen. Judith took out her phone to scroll through her social feed. Unexpectedly, with a single swipe down, there was Marcia's latest update. It was posted half an hour ago, accompanied by a photo of a neatly packed suitcase. "I'm so happy. Tomorrow I can go to Wufeng Mountain with my friends." Judith was silent for a moment. It was unexpected, yet made perfect sense. If it weren't for Marcia, Ellis would have no reason to suddenly want to go out with her. Early the next morning, Judith set off with Ellis, after being together for over 2 years. There wasn't a single trace of her in his car except for a plush keychain Marcia had given him. The purple fuzz looked soft and cozy, clashing starkly with the cool-toned interior of his car, yet it was bright and vivid, much like the impression Marcia must have left on him. Along the way, Judith had no mind for conversation and fell asleep while reading the documents. After arriving at Wufeng Mountain, Ellis kept looking around, hoping to catch sight of Marcia. Judith pretended not to know and asked nothing. When they reached the mountain guest house, Ellis finally saw Marcia checking in. Just as hoped, Judith thought Ellis would have been happier if the person standing beside Marcia wasn't Fabian. Ellis stepped forward with a grim expression. "Why did you two come together?" Fabian didn't look any more pleased as he said, "Ellis, you're really like a lingering ghost." His plans for a romantic getaway with Marcia had fallen through. And spotting Judith behind them, he directed all his pent-up frustration at her. "Judith, aren't the malls in the city enough for you? Why on earth did you have to come to Wufeng Mountain?" Judith froze for a moment, then shot him a cold glance. "My feet are my own business. Who asked you to interfere?" Seeing Judith retort, Fabian grew even angrier. Who cares about interfering? If you can't even manage your own man, don't expect others to worry for you. Judith, even with her good temper, could hardly bear it anymore. If you're sick, go get treated. Okay. Seeing the two about to argue, Marcia immediately put on a show of mediation. Oh dear, stop fighting. Aren't you best friends? Why quarrel over such a trivial matter? Judith felt a sudden tightness in her chest. Yes, best friends. She and Fabian had grown up in the same courtyard. Back then, both families' adults were very busy and had no time to take care of the children, and Fabian's family situation was even more unusual. His parents had a marriage of convenience, each doing their own thing, acting as if the child didn't exist. He was a quiet kid back then, wouldn't even speak up when hungry. It was Judith who found him passed out in the house. For many years after that, Judith would always share anything good, food, fun, or laughter with him, treating him almost like family. But before, in his pursuit of Marcia, he actually sent her entire thesis to Marcia. He didn't even think it was a big deal, calling it mutual help between classmates. Just like how she had helped him before, Judith snapped out of her thoughts, gave Fabian a long look, and then spoke word by word. I don't have friends like that. With that said, Judith ignored the three of them and walked away with her suitcase in tow. Fabian stared blankly at Judith's retreating figure, unable to process what had just happened. Since childhood, Judith had always been gentle, considerate, and tolerant toward him. For so long, he had grown completely accustomed to dumping his emotions on her, never once imagining she would one day say such words. After the initial surprise, Fabian felt a surge of anger at being publicly humiliated. He shouted at her retreating figure, "Hey, what's gotten into you today?" Judith didn't even turn her head as she disappeared around the corridor corner. Fabian suddenly felt a pang of unease, exchanging a glance with Ellis behind him. The man also wore a deeply furrowed brow. He was just about to say something when Marcia cut him off. Marcia widened her eyes innocently and said, "Senior Judith is in such a bad mood today. Senior Fabian, you shouldn't keep arguing with her." Fabian suppressed the unease in his heart with these words, then shrugged nonchalantly. "Judith isn't as considerate as you, don't mind her." Ellis also snapped out of it and said lightly, "She'll be fine in a few days. I know her temperament well." After the meal, the four of them headed together toward the mountaintop where He Temple was located. On the mountain climbing steps, Judith lagged slightly behind. When she looked up again, she noticed the three ahead had already gained quite a lead. Naturally, no one waited for her. Judith slowed her pace without calling out to them, walking up the steps alone, entering the temple. She saw the tree of affinity in the courtyard, its branches laden with crimson prayer strips. The red and green complemented each other beautifully. Countless wishes were written on those crimson prayer papers fluttering above. "May my secret love blossom into a happy union. I hope to live a harmonious and happy life together." In previous years, Judith had always hoped to visit this temple of the twin deities of harmony with Ellis to pray for their future happiness. But now, Judith smiled and walked to the prayer platform beneath the tree. She raised her brush and wrote on the red paper, "May Ellis fulfill his wish to share heart and fate with Marcia, lasting forever." Now, she was actually writing blessings for Ellis and Marcia with not a ripple of emotion in her heart. Judith stood on tiptoe, ready to tie the red paper to a branch. Just then, a voice suddenly rang out. "What did you write?" It turned out to be Ellis, who had somehow appeared beside her. Judith was startled but quickly composed herself. She glanced at him and replied, "It's nothing." She continued hanging up the red paper. When finished, she said quietly, "Just the usual old sayings. May we all get what we wish for." After returning from Five Peaks Mountain, Ellis became extremely busy, leaving early and returning late, sometimes not even coming home. Judith was even busier than him. The prearranged visa was finally issued, followed by repeated confirmations of the interview, academic records, and admission notice, along with various negotiations regarding travel and accommodation. Today marked the sixth time Judith came home later than Ellis. Ellis, unusually seated on the living room sofa, asked unhappily upon seeing her open the door, "What's kept you so busy lately?" Judith changed her shoes and entered the house, her expression unchanged, preparing some written materials. Ellis recalled her earlier mention of going out for research. Feeling a flicker of suspicion, "Does research really take this long?" But then, feeling irritated, he simply said, "My mom asked us to go back tomorrow for a meal together." Judith hesitated for a moment. She had a flight to Philadelphia tomorrow evening and was worried about unexpected complications, but she still nodded, thinking this would be the perfect opportunity to discuss canceling the engagement with the Ellis family. Yet when she woke up the next day, Ellis was nowhere to be found. As lunchtime approached, Judith still hadn't received any message from him, so she went alone to the Ellis residence. In the Ellis family living room, she saw Ellis's mom and got straight to the point. "Auntie, Here's the bracelet you gave me before, I'm returning it to you." The noblewoman's face rarely showed a look of surprise. Judith, though this daughter-in-law was arranged through an old family marriage agreement, whether in terms of lineage or capability, she was quite satisfactory. Moreover, with her considerate nature, she could take care of Ellis's daily life in perfect order. "Why, Judith, weren't you and Ellis getting along just fine before?" Judith answered calmly. "Such an engagement and relationship would be too hasty for both of us." Her words were soft yet resolute. Ellis's mom grew anxious and grabbed Judith as she prepared to leave. "Wait, Judith, let me call Ellis first. We should discuss this further." The phone rang for a long time before being answered. Ellis's mom put it on speaker, allowing both to hear Ellis's impatient voice coming through the phone. "Mom, I'm busy right now. What is it?" Ellis's mom was about to speak when another woman's voice came through from the other end. "Ellis, Sr., please help me see if this is done well." Judith recognized it was Marcia. Ellis's mom was even more surprised, but when she turned, she met Judith's calm gaze. Ellis's mom immediately felt her blood boil. "Ellis, who is that woman beside you?" Judith smiled and didn't listen further. She placed the bracelet on the table and walked straight out of Ellis's house. Her steps were light, feeling an unprecedented sense of relief. "Goodbye, Ellis. Never see you again." Ellis didn't wait to hear Ellis's mom finish speaking before hanging up the phone directly. He frowned with annoyance. Just a meal. Yet Judith hadn't even bothered to cover for him, letting his mother's call come straight to him. Ellis thought this, but an indescribable unease suddenly welled up in his heart. Marcia, noticing his odd expression, immediately put on an act and asked, "Ellis, Sr., do you have something urgent going on?" Ellis fell silent for a moment. Steadying his composure, he replied nonchalantly, "It's nothing, just a family gathering." "What?" Marcia covered her mouth in surprise. "This isn't urgent at all. Senior, you should head back. I can just ask Fabian to help me later." Ellis's gaze darkened briefly. "It's fine. I'll stay until you finish this document." About 10 minutes later, Marcia stood up from the desk and stretched. "Ellis, let's go eat first. This thing is a bit tricky. We can come back and work on it slowly after dinner." Ellis nodded in agreement. Normally, he should have been happy to spend more time with Marcia, but now there was a growing restlessness in his heart, as if something kept tugging at his thoughts over and over. In that phone call just now, Judith didn't say anything. Did she? Was the purpose of his mother's call really just to hear who he was with? Ellis tried to calm himself down as he drove Marcia to the restaurant. The dishes were ordered in advance, 6 in total, with both presentation and taste being excellent. Marcia exclaimed for who knows how many times about the price, then praised, "This dish is so delicious. Is it called Yanduxian? So tender." Ellis smiled. "Eat more if you like it." After speaking with Marcia, he inexplicably thought of Judith. She also said that the restaurant's version of Yang Duxian was exceptionally delicious. At that time, she pursed her lips and smiled gently, saying, "Later I'll go ask the chef for the recipe, so I can make it for you at home someday." How he responded at the time, he couldn't quite remember, yet he'd only been here once with Judith, and still he remembered her words so clearly. Ellis found himself thinking about Judith far too often, and the bad feeling in his heart grew stronger. He couldn't resist taking out his phone, only to see that under the Do Not Disturb block, Ellis's mom had already called 28 times, the moment he called back. The phone was immediately answered by Ellis's mom. "You little brat, finally decided to return my call." Ellis frowned with visible irritation. "Mom, what's this about?" Ellis's mom responded in agitated frustration. "Judith wants to call off the engagement." Ellis froze at the mention of calling off the engagement. He stood momentarily stunned, uncharacteristically listening as his mother launched into an endless stream of anxious rambling. "You brat. How could you let down such a wonderful girl and ruin such a good marriage? Cut ties with that other girl immediately and apologize properly to Judith. You hear me? I never knew you had this kind of character." His heart was pounding with panic, yet he still replied coldly and impatiently. She was the one being unreasonable. Who could stop her? Ellis's mom let out a scornful laugh. "Oh, after living for over 20 years, you've finally learned to crack jokes." Ellis fell abruptly silent in the face of his mother's sarcasm. Indeed, he couldn't find another woman as emotionally stable and suitable for marriage as Judith in his life. What about Marcia? Marcia tilted her head in confusion from across the dining table, meeting his gaze without understanding. Looking back now, everything she did didn't seem as innocent as she claimed. After a moment, Ellis asked in a low voice, "Mom, is Judith still with you?" Ellis's mom replied, "No, Judith left a while ago." "All right, I'll go find her." Ellis's mom hadn't finished speaking when her son abruptly hung up the phone. She was used to it, and couldn't help but recall Judith's demeanor before she left. Her expression was calm, and when she spoke of Ellis, her tone was gentle yet resolute, without a trace of fluctuation. Her son was handsome in appearance, But his personality was arrogant and aloof, yet Judith could tolerate his bad temper and sharp tongue when she used to talk about Ellis with me. Her eyes would always sparkle, nothing like how she looked just now. Ellis's mom couldn't help but shake her head. It seemed their families, Ellis and Judith, might no longer be destined to become one. Before the meal was even finished, Ellis across the table had already stood up. Marcia quickly rose as well. Senior Ellis, are you leaving already? Ellis continued walking out without stopping, saying, no need to rush if you haven't finished eating. Take your time, I have something to attend to at home. You can head back to school on your own later. Wait, Senior, but that document. Marcia hadn't even finished speaking when Ellis's figure vanished from the restaurant's second floor. She bit her lip in frustration. Just what had that Judith done? To think she could make Ellis leave her behind like this. Ellis returned home, unsure if it was his imagination, but the house felt even emptier than before. Judith wasn't on the couch where she usually sat either. He walked into the bedroom, but no one was there either. He called Judith, only to hear the automated female voice repeatedly announcing that her phone was switched off. Ellis's heart kept sinking. He scanned the bedroom and noticed the desk was completely bare. The photo frame containing their picture together had vanished, along with all the decorative trinkets she had bought. Ellis flung open the wardrobe. Judith's half was now completely empty. His heart suddenly pounded violently, a wave of tension spreading through him like a suffocating grip. Ellis strode out of the bedroom and began checking the other rooms. On the bookshelf, Judith's reference books were all gone, leaving only his belongings in the bathroom. The sticky notes that used to be on the fridge, listing daily fruits and meal plans, had all vanished without a trace. Judith's traces of living there had completely disappeared, with only the empty spaces in various places signaling her departure. Ellis felt as if he'd been struck over the head, his chest heaving uncontrollably. He took a deep breath and dialed Fabian's number. As soon as the call connected, Ellis cut straight to the point. Hey, do you know where Judith went? On the other end of the line, Fabian sounded baffled and soon let out a cold laugh. I'm hardly her friend anymore. But you're her fiancé. If you don't know, how would I? Ellis unusually refrained from trading barbs and simply said, she's gone. There's nothing left of hers at home. Fabian hesitated for a moment, taking a long while to process the news. What did you say? Ellis asked through gritted teeth. Aren't you her best friend? You don't even know where she went. Fabian, a loud crash came from his end. As if he'd suddenly stood up and knocked something over. Ellis, you lived with her every single day. Didn't you notice anything unusual? Ellis twisted his lips. You think I'm as idle as you, playing spot the difference at home all day? Fabian took a deep breath. Can't be bothered to banter with you. I'll ask someone else first. The call ended, and Ellis felt unusually exhausted. He collapsed onto the sofa. For the first time feeling the emptiness of his home stretching endlessly before him. The small ornaments that used to sit atop the television had vanished, and the matching couple's mugs were gone from the coffee table. Ellis had always thought these things were just for show, useless and space-consuming. Now that they were gone, he actually felt unaccustomed to their absence. His gaze fell upon the small box that had appeared on the coffee table. It was their engagement ring. His mind went blank for a moment. Gone. Judith, how could she be gone? Ellis recalled all the unusual behavior Judith had shown over the past month. The woman always kept her eyes lowered, lost in thought about who knows what. All her expressions were faint, and often she didn't even react to what he said. Before long, Fabian called. I asked her friends in the student council. They said she received an offer from the University of Pennsylvania a month ago and is already on a plane to Philadelphia. 1 month later, Ellis was reviewing documents in his office when he received an inquiry call from the butler. Young master, how do you wish to handle the property at Jinyuan near the school? Ellis frowned slightly, his tone impatient as if hearing nonsense. Sell it, she's gone. The marriage is dissolved, what's the point of keeping it? The property near the school was merely a temporary residence anyway. After Judith left, he had moved back to the Ellis family villa. His life remained unchanged. It was just the departure of a woman, nothing significant. The butler, accustomed to his temperament, replied in a businesslike manner, very well, young master, I shall arrange for its sale immediately. The other end of the line remained silent for a long while, with no response from the young master. Yet, the butler did not hang up. A momentary silence fell, and the butler could only hear steady breathing on the other end of the line. Forget it. Ellis finally finished reading the single remaining page in his hand, his tone unchanged. Don't worry about it, just leave it there for now. Not long after hanging up the phone, Ellis received a WeChat message from Marcia. Senior Ellis, the amusement park in the Southern District has opened. When are you free? Let's go together. Ellis lowered his eyes to the message, inexplicably recalling how Judith had mentioned that place before, every time he crossed paths with Marcia. It made him think of Judith. How strange. He irritably furrowed his brows and typed a few words. I've been busy lately, find someone else to go with you. Evening, Ellis, senior partner of the team where Mr. George led a dinner gathering. Ordering a table full of dishes at a 5-star hotel and opening several bottles of champagne, not long ago, they had resolved a major case, a cross-provincial economic dispute that eradicated a malignant tumor. Today, the dozen or so team members finally found time to gather for a meal. At the table, Mr. George raised his glass and once again affirmed Ellis' capabilities. This time, it was all thanks to Ellis' keen eye for spotting that critical regulatory loophole in the company. To make such a significant contribution right after becoming a full-time employee, your future is boundless. Ellis raised his glass in return, neither haughty nor humble, thanks to the guidance and help from my seniors. I've gained a great deal. After several rounds of drinks, most at the table were thoroughly intoxicated. Ellis surprisingly accepted every toast, downing cup after cup. Some still sober colleagues found it strange and whispered to those beside them, "This isn't Ellis's first time working on a case. Is winning this one really worth being so happy about? Who knows? We mere mortals can't fathom the minds of geniuses." When the gathering ended and people headed home, someone called designated drivers for those who'd gotten drunk. Ellis, who usually remained stone-faced while cleaning up after others, had actually become one of the drunkards this time. The helpful colleague stuffed him into the back seat and asked again, "Ellis, where's your home?" Ellis closed his eyes and mumbled in response, "Jinyuan, Block B." The colleague set the destination on his phone for him and asked the designated driver to take good care of him, requesting extra patience. The driver had seen plenty of drunks before and nodded routinely, "Got it, don't worry," but both of them had worried unnecessarily. Ellis had excellent drinking manners. When drunk, he simply closed his eyes and slept quietly in the back seat, causing no trouble. Yet unexpectedly, upon arriving at the garage, the young man insisted on going upstairs alone. Seeing him step out of the car and walk straight ahead, the designated driver quickly unbuckled his seatbelt and rushed after him. "Sir, do you need help?" The gentleman's face was flushed, clearly showing he had drunk quite a lot, alcohol visibly affecting his complexion, yet his gaze remained remarkably clear, still sharp as ever. Were it not for his slightly unsteady posture, one would never guess he was drunk. His expression and tone were surprisingly composed as he said, "Thank you, but no need, someone's waiting for me at home." With that, he walked straight ahead, actually leaving behind both his car keys and phone. The designated driver snapped out of his daze and quickly chased after him, saying, "Sir, you forgot your things." Though his actions and speech seemed logically coherent, in the end he was still drunk. Watching Ellis walk away, the designated driver inexplicably sensed a trace of desolation in his retreating figure. Ellis took the elevator upstairs, walked slowly to his front door, and unlocked it with his fingerprint. "Judith." He entered the house, his mind in a daze. Unconsciously calling her name, the sound seemed to abruptly awaken him from his own fantasy. Before me, the room was pitch black, empty and cold, no scent of hangover soup, no warm yellow lights, and no Judith. "Oh, so she's already gone." Ellis wore a blank expression for a moment, his eyes slowly reddening. "Judith, my head hurts so much." Naturally, there was no response. Ellis covered his eyes with his arm, as if unable to bear this silence any longer. "Judith, I miss you so much. Can you come back?" 1 month ago, after nearly 20 hours of flight with a layover in between, Judith finally landed in Philadelphia. Inside the airport, she retrieved her 2 large suitcases from the conveyor belt and wheeled them through the Green Channel. Judith went to the phone card counter and spent $20 on a temporary SIM card. Outside the airport was pitch black. Judith turned to check the time inside and realized it was early morning in Country M, with a 12-hour time difference. Back home it was just afternoon. She thought for a moment and made a call, which was quickly answered. Judith smiled. "Grandpa, I've already arrived in Philadelphia." The sound of mahjong tiles being shuffled could still be heard over the phone. The elderly voice replied cheerfully, "Good, good, as long as our Judith is safe." Judith had a very traditional wealthy family background. Her father died in an accident when she was 5, and not long after, her mother remarried. More than a decade later, Judith still remembered that the day her mother left was a stormy afternoon filled with thunder. The woman was dragging her suitcase to leave when she was stopped by the elderly man who happened to be coming downstairs. "Judith, aren't you taking her with you?" She could no longer remember what her mother had said, but her grandfather's vigorous voice remained crystal clear in her memory. "If you don't want her, I'll take her." The old man tapped his cane and took on the role of guardian for Judith. Thus, the grandfather who had just lost his son and Judith, who had just lost her father, found solace in each other's company. Holding hands with tears in their eyes, they lived together for many, many years. Judith replied with a smile, "All right, you enjoy your card game, I'll get back to my work too." Just as she was about to hang up, her grandfather hesitated slightly and called out, "Oh, Judith, that boy from the Ellis family came by." Judith was momentarily stunned before her expression returned to normal. "Grandpa, don't try to persuade me." The old man had barely begun speaking when Judith already knew what he was going to say next. Having lived together for over a decade, the grandfather and granddaughter shared an unspoken understanding. Grandpa sighed and said, "You've always been strong-willed since childhood. Back then, you were set on that boy, and I had no objections. Now, if you want to call off the engagement, I have no objections either. It's for the best, at least you didn't discover the incompatibility after marriage. Yes, it's all in the past, Grandpa." Judith kept her lips curved in a smile. "I think things are just fine as they are now." After hanging up the phone, Judith took a taxi to the hotel she had booked earlier. After a brief night's rest, she dragged her suitcase to the pre-arranged apartment near the University of Pennsylvania. The building was quiet, with a pleasant environment that matched the online photos quite well. Judith pulled up the landlord's number from her phone and dialed. Before long, the landlord arrived, a kind-looking white woman with golden, seaweed-like long hair. A few hours later, Judith officially signed the contract with the landlord, securing the apartment for 3 years. Before leaving, the landlady kindly told her, "The apartment next to yours is also mine. The tenant is a young man who also came from your country, China. He seems decent, you can ask him for help if needed." Judith glanced at the tightly shut door across from her and nodded. She didn't think much of it, letting the information slip past her after hearing it. In the afternoon, she went to the University of Pennsylvania to complete her graduate registration, attended a gathering for new Chinese students, and made a few new friends. The door next door remained tightly shut when I returned home. The next day was the graduate research group meeting with my advisor. Professor Philip, my advisor, appeared to be a stern and old-fashioned little man, yet was unexpectedly witty and humorous. Their research focused on capital operations and international financing investment, and groups were assigned during the very first team meeting. Judith's partner was a tall red-haired girl with small freckles on her face, a round face but a pointed chin, named Elsa. The two exchanged contact information and got along quite well. There were still a few days before the official start of school. Judith got a proper phone card and made trips to the supermarket and furniture store. She planned to add some things to her apartment, as that would give her a sense of home and security. She had indeed overestimated her strength. Carrying a stack of boxes up 5 flights of stairs left her utterly exhausted. Just as the boxes in her hands were about to fall, Judith suddenly saw a hand reach out in front of her, firmly catching them. There was no denying it, this was an exceptionally attractive hand, pale skin with distinct knuckles, long and clean fingers, faint blue veins subtly visible beneath the surface. After the panic subsided, Judith let out a relieved sigh and looked up to say, "Thank you." But the moment she raised her eyes, she was struck by the refined appearance of the person before her. The man was very tall, wearing a white t-shirt, and had an excellent physique. He appeared to be in his early 20s, with typically Eastern features, yet his bone structure was strikingly three-dimensional and deep-set. His facial contours were sharp and distinct, and his gaze was clear and piercing. Judith silently added in her mind, "He looks like a smart person." The man seemed not to have heard what she said. As he was on the phone, speaking in quite fluent American English, she felt a bit awkward for a moment, having no free hands to take the suitcase he was holding for her, and didn't want to disturb him further. Fortunately, this awkward moment didn't last long. He soon hung up the phone. The man slightly lowered his head, his thin eyelids drooping as he asked in Chinese, "Judith, which floor?" Judith muttered in response, "This floor." At that moment, a sudden sound, "This little beauty is your new neighbor." Her. Judith only then noticed there was a young man standing beside him, equally youthful and handsome in appearance. "I'm Noah, his Robert." The landlady mentioned that a new tenant moved in next door and asked Robert to take good care of you. With that, Noah winked at her and took 2 boxes from her hands, dissolving much of the awkward atmosphere. So he was the pretty decent neighbor the landlady had mentioned. Judith let her gaze drift across Robert's face once more. Handsome as he was, his expression hardly radiated warmth. She thanked them again, then introduced herself as Judith. The 2 men took the boxes from Judith's hands and walked together toward the same front door. Robert spoke little, while Noah chattered incessantly, leaping from one topic to another like a grasshopper in summer. Judith stood empty-handed, feeling even more embarrassed to let the conversation drop. So she responded sentence by sentence, finally making it through the doorway. Judith let out a long sigh of relief in her heart. She opened the door, took the cardboard box from their hands, and set it down by her feet. Judith only now noticed that her handsome neighbor had a small mole on the webbing between his right thumb and forefinger. Dazzling, with a peculiar kind of sexiness, Judith felt the temperature on her face rise several degrees hotter. Earlier it was from the heat, and a bit of embarrassment, but now she felt downright ashamed. She quickly asked politely, "Thank you for your help. Would you like to come in for some tea?" Noah was about to speak when he was interrupted by Robert beside him. "No need." His Adam's apple moved slightly as he spoke, his expression still impassive. Judith visibly relaxed, nodding as she said, "I'll go in first then." The door before them closed. Robert and Noah turned around and walked toward the door across the hallway. Once inside, Noah teased, "You were the one who offered to help, yet you barely said a word, just 2 sentences. I did all the talking." Robert snorted lightly. "You love chatting. Isn't it perfectly reasonable to leave the diplomacy to you?" Noah fell silent, but then it occurred to him his partner was sharp-witted and capable. A guaranteed postgraduate in finance at the University of Pennsylvania, always the center of attention with admirers both on and off campus as numerous as fish in a river, but when it comes to love knocking at his door, his attitude is either rejection or outright ignoring it. Offering help just now was understandable, but he actually initiated a conversation with a woman. Noah stroked his chin, eyeing him suspiciously. "Did something possess you today?" Robert tilted his head back to drink water, yet the woman's face flashed before his eyes, very pretty, with an obedient demeanor. "Judith." The name echoed once in his mind. Then, Robert gave Noah a lukewarm glance. "Don't overthink it, I'm just trying to maintain good neighborly relations." Judith never expected that by the time she familiarized herself with the graduate study process and memorized the buildings in her campus district, a whole month would have already passed. The advisor Philip kept a fast-paced schedule, demanding research progress reports every fortnight. Yesterday, Judith and her partner Elsa finally submitted their work right at the deadline, which left them with some free time this afternoon. 4 p.m., Judith was jolted awake by her phone's ringtone. She lifted her head from the blankets, annoyed she'd forgotten to enable Do Not Disturb. As she picked up the phone, the name Ellis flashed on the screen. Judith paused for a moment, hesitated briefly, but ultimately answered the call. Given the time difference, it must have been 4 a.m. on his end. Ellis had always been disciplined. No matter how busy work got, he would only strive to be more efficient, never allowing it to disrupt his sleep. "Hello," on the other end of the line. Judith's voice was drowsy and soft. It had only been a month, yet Ellis felt his breath catch the moment he heard her voice again. Judith heard no response from the other end and grew puzzled. "Wrong number. Why is there no sound?" Ellis listened to her gentle, unguarded voice and suddenly felt a surge of resentment toward her. She left just like that, so decisively and cleanly. Almost everyone around her knew she was leaving, keeping only him and Fabian in the dark. She almost turned her own life upside down. Ellis tried to keep his voice calm, but it still came out hoarse. "No, wrong number. I was looking for you." "All right," Judith responded without any emotional fluctuation. Her voice as gentle and composed as ever. "What's the matter with you?" Domestic classmates Judith had hardly been in contact, and after going abroad, she didn't even share her new number, partly because of international calls, and partly to deliberately avoid contact. It seems Ellis must have gotten the phone number from Grandpa. Ellis's voice carried a cold edge of anger. "Why did you leave without saying a word?" Faced with the man's unreasonable and rhetorical question, Judith showed no trace of anger. "Do you think there's anything between us that needs explaining?" Judith gave what seemed like a resigned laugh before sighing. "Ellis, if you'd cared at all, you couldn't have missed knowing I was leaving." The sound fell silent for a moment. On the other end of the phone, Ellis sounded almost gnashing his teeth. "What about the wedding? Are we still getting married or not?" Judith recalled the bracelet she had returned and the engagement ring left on the coffee table in that house. Her attitude and thoughts were already quite clear. "Ellis, don't ask questions you already know the answers to." After a long silence, the person on the phone finally said, "Judith, don't say I didn't warn you." Judith hadn't expected to hear any comforting words from this person anyway. After all, his good manners only surfaced when he was with Marcia. She too had once been unwilling to accept poverty. Why would Ellis, such an aloof and self-absorbed person, willingly lower his head repeatedly for Marcia? But now when she thinks of it, her heart is calm and at peace. Judith smiled and spoke softly yet resolutely. "I will never regret it." Whether it was the love she gave during the more than 2 years with him, or the decision to leave now, she had no regrets. Ellis hung up the phone directly. Judith no longer felt like sleeping and opened WeChat on her phone, which she hadn't used in a long time. Fabian had sent her numerous messages. The 99+ red notification, glaringly conspicuous. First came frenzied accusations and emotional blackmail, followed later by remorseful confessions and apologies. Judith scrolled through the messages indifferently, wondering how much genuine emotion was actually contained within them. She knew Fabian didn't quite dare to call her directly. Whenever something went wrong in their friendship, Fabian's first instinct was always to run away. At first, blaming others was his escape. These days, he only dared to leave messages for himself, another form of escape. Even with all those girlfriends he'd had, that man still didn't seem to know how to interact with women normally. Due to his family background, Judith could understand, but she couldn't accept Fabian, this so-called best friend, who took advantage of their close relationship to recklessly hurt her while pursuing another woman. Judith hesitated for a moment before typing a 1 in reply. At 8 p.m. Philadelphia time, Fabian's call came through. His voice was urgent and came straight to the point. Judith, I'm sorry. Judith had always believed that feelings of guilt were useless. Of course, many emotions were the same, they ultimately had no real impact on the outcome. The harm remained. And it made her see clearly the two men in her life who mattered deeply to her. She replied softly, I accept. Judith's calmness made Fabian even more flustered, yet he didn't know what else to say, so he began to speak incoherently. After you left, I thought a lot. It was because of Marsha's matter that I did many terrible things to you. He talked a lot, as if after her departure, Fabian had finally rediscovered the dynamic they once shared between them. Judith listened without interrupting, until he mentioned Marsha. But Marsha means no harm. Judith had no patience to listen further and cut straight to the point. I don't want to comment on the woman you fancy, so let's not discuss her. If you're done saying what you wanted to say, I'm hanging up now. Fabian urged anxiously. Don't hang up. After this sound, Judith paused in her movements. She neither spoke nor hung up the phone. Fabian also fell silent. For a moment, everything was quiet. A few minutes later, Fabian said with difficulty, I'm really sorry, Judith. Will we still be friends in the future? Judith closed her eyes briefly, feeling a pang of sadness as well. Fabian, do you remember what you said before? During high school, Fabian was constantly surrounded by romantic rumors involving different girls. One of them was particularly intense, with a strong possessive desire over Fabian. Naturally, Judith, the girl who was close to Fabian, became her imaginary rival. Lost homework and rumors, such trivial matters didn't bother Judith. For a top student in the teacher's eyes, these things could hardly make an impact, so Judith and Fabian didn't take it seriously at first. In the end, when the girl saw that these obstacles had no effect on Judith, her actions became increasingly extreme. A few months later, it escalated into their little group planning to bully Judith. At that time, Fabian arrived just in time, bringing along the police and teachers. After resolving the matter, he hugged Judith and burst into loud sobs. He even said, Judith would always be his best friend, that he would never turn against her for any woman, and that he would always choose Judith when conflicts arose between them. Looking back now, after Marsha appeared, those words turned out to be complete nonsense, because Fabian became the very source of that conflict. Marsha didn't do anything that actually harmed Judith. But Fabian was willingly hurting Judith for her sake. Fabian remembered it too, momentarily too bitter to speak. Judith let out a light laugh, tinged with mockery. Tell me, did you ever take our decade-long friendship seriously? So I won't take it seriously anymore. After dealing with two troublesome matters, Judith could finally sleep peacefully. No sooner had she laid her head on the pillow than her partner Elsa called. Hey, Judith, I'm downstairs at your place. After living here for a month, Judith still wasn't quite used to the enthusiasm of the people in Country M. She asked in confusion, What's wrong? Is there a problem with our paper? My God, no wonder the big boss thinks highly of you. Do you even think about anything other than papers in your free time? Elsa burst into laughter. Let's go to Mist Bar. We just decided in the group chat. Everyone said since we finally finished the big boss's task, the whole team should get together. Chapter 17. Because Professor Philip has high and strict standards, many people's theses and research results have been sent back for revision. It's only been a month since the semester started, and even the freshmen have started calling him the big boss like the senior students. Judith initially wanted to refuse, but then thought about it being the first gathering and not wanting to appear too antisocial, so she agreed, quickly changed her clothes, and went downstairs. Elsa sat in the car, rolled down the window, and whistled at her. Judith, you really are such a good girl. Elsa, it's really the first time I've seen someone dress so plainly for a bar. Judith wasn't wearing any makeup, dressed in a white thin long-sleeved top paired with a denim skirt, looking every bit the well-behaved student. She opened the passenger door and asked in confusion, What's wrong? Nothing. Elsa pinched her cheek. Big sister will take good care of you. Inside Mist Bar, the multicolored lights shifted rapidly, the music was loud, and the place was packed with people. On the dance floor, some moved to the rhythm of the music, while others sat at the booths drinking and playing drinking games. Busty waitresses weaved through the seats with trays full of drinks, occasionally sitting down to flirt with customers. Just a little charm, and another bottle of liquor was sold, in an unfamiliar environment. Judith followed Elsa uneasily toward the booth reserved by their classmates. "You're here." Inside the booth, someone greeted them warmly. When a few boys tried to pressure them into drinking, Elsa firmly refused, citing the excuse that she and Judith still had to review academic papers when they got home. They meant no harm, and upon hearing this reason, they expressed deep sympathy. Judith actually felt somewhat drowsy in such a boisterous atmosphere. Until the sound of a microphone echoed through the venue. "Next, let's welcome our highly anticipated lead singer." The moment the lead singer mentioned by the host took the stage, the atmosphere in the bar was completely electrified. Judith looked toward the stage amidst the screams, her previously dazed eyes suddenly widening. On the stage was none other than Robert, whom she hadn't seen in a month. He wore a white tank top. The smooth muscle lines on his arms exuding a palpable sense of strength. Under the lights, the silver ear stud on his cartilage reflected a dazzling gleam, and that small mole on the web of his right hand. From such a distance, Judith had no idea how she managed to see it. He played the electric guitar, singing rock music with a slightly hoarse voice. Judith felt her ears go numb from the blaring music. Beside her, Elsa propped her chin in her hand, looking utterly enchanted. "I'd heard Robert performs here, but I never thought we'd actually catch him on our first visit," Judith asked curiously. "Is he famous?" Elsa was visibly shocked by her ignorance. "Oh my God, he's basically the campus celebrity. How could you not know?" Judith shook her head blankly. She had no desire for socializing. Her daily routine revolved around the 3 points of school, coffee shop, and home. Coming to the bar today was practically her first real outing in a month. Elsa couldn't take her eyes off Robert on stage. He's a second-year grad student mentored by another professor. "I heard he got directly admitted after finishing undergrad," Judith sincerely admired. "That's impressive." Elsa nodded and concluded, "What a charming man." Judith took a delicate sip of wine and agreed. Oh, indeed, she remembered her first meeting with Robert. She should have been more impressed by his friends, yet she clearly remembered some of his reactions. The man's expression remained indifferent from start to finish, and the two exchanged no more than 2 sentences, none exceeding 3 words. Due to the complexity of her family background, Judith could keenly discern people's attitudes when interacting with them. She felt her neighbor had only helped at that time because he happened to be in a good mood, not because he wanted more life connections with her. Judith naturally wouldn't seek unwelcome attention. Life was already busy enough, and the breathtaking feeling from that first glance quickly dissolved into the casual nods exchanged between neighbors. Like a small pebble tossed into the ocean, it stirred a tiny splash before vanishing without a ripple. As they chatted, the band on stage stepped down. Not even the full venue's encore could sway their determination to clock out. Beside her, Elsa suddenly grabbed Judith's hand. "Do you think I'd succeed if I asked Robert for his contact information?" Judith recalled the man's aloof demeanor and hesitated momentarily. "You could give it a try." "Hey!" Judith was directly. Elsa yanked to her feet. She was dragged along, walking briskly in the direction where Robert and the others had disappeared. The back door of the bar. The band members hadn't left, gathered together chatting in a group. Just didn't see Robert. Elsa wasn't afraid at all and walked straight up to ask. The group had grown accustomed to Robert's popularity and unanimously pointed in one direction, saying Robert was over there smoking. Elsa thanked them openly, then dragged Judith along in that direction. One more street and you'd reach the bustling downtown, where neon lights from slightly taller buildings cast their glow this way. Robert leaned against the wall, the crimson ember between his fingers standing out conspicuously amidst the kaleidoscope of colors. Judith found it surprising. Since Robert's appearance had always given her the impression of someone who led a rather healthy lifestyle, seeing the two women approach, Robert raised an eyebrow and stubbed out his cigarette. Elsa showed no shyness and stepped forward directly to state her purpose. She said that both she and her friend were first-year graduate students at the University of Pennsylvania, his direct juniors, and wanted his contact information. Judith felt the awkwardness of meeting an acquaintance and stood aside looking at the sky, not speaking at all. "Contact information." Robert raised his eyebrows and pointed at Elsa's back, pretending not to know the Judith behind her. "She does." Judith, caught off guard by being called out, felt her whole body tense up. She abruptly turned her head, meeting Robert's amused gaze. An Issa's expression of shock mixed with a hint of flustered annoyance. She quickly took out her phone and said, "I'll send it to you." In all honesty, the two of them weren't familiar with each other at all. They'd only bumped into each other once that morning when leaving home. The only reason they exchanged contact information was because Judith had managed to order some delicious meat buns from a Chinese-owned shop. To thank Robert and Noah for their help when they first met, she steamed a whole basket of buns that same day and brought it over to them. Robert also said it was delicious. So the two added each other on Facebook, and Judith forwarded the shop owner's contact information to him. It was an incredibly roundabout and complicated process. Judith later thought to herself that she could have just given the account directly, why go through all that trouble? But at the time, seeing Robert hand over his phone to scan the code, she didn't react at all. It couldn't possibly be that he intentionally wanted to add me. After finishing their conversation, the band members prepared to head home and started walking this way. Someone warmly slung an arm around Robert's neck and said, "Being such a gentleman today, you put out all your cigarettes." Robert looked relaxed with a hint of a smile. "You guys leaving?" "Yeah, let's meet up again when we get the chance." The group waved once more at Judith and Elsa. "See you again sometime, you two lovely ladies." Judith subconsciously waved back, her slightly dazed expression sparking a round of laughter. Robert also curved his lips into a slight smile. Straightening up, he said, "It's getting late. Are you heading home, or do you have plans to stay out all night with friends?" Though his words were a general inquiry, his gaze remained fixed on Judith. For some reason, she detected a hint of urging in his look. Judith glanced at Elsa beside her. "Do you want to go home?" Elsa glared at her but still said, "Staying here is boring anyway. I'll leave when you do." So the three of them walked together toward the parking lot. Elsa dragged Judith along behind, gritting her teeth as she whispered fiercely, "You actually know Robert?" Judith quickly found her footing and replied, My neighbor." Seeing that Elsa was about to lose her temper, Judith quickly made a gesture to stop her. "Stop it. In the past month, I've only met him a handful of times, we're really not that close." Elsa reached out as if to pinch her cheek, unexpectedly. Robert stepped between them, cutting in abruptly. "I'm going that way anyway. I can give her a ride home," Elsa asked with her eyes. "Judith, you call this not close?" Judith hid behind Robert and replied with her eyes, "Seriously." But she was also quite generous, giving the opportunity to spend time with the handsome guy to Judith. "Okay, let's catch up another time then." As she spoke, her red long hair swayed, and she got into the car, soon driving away. "Get in the car." Robert beside her interrupted Judith's gaze. Judith let out an "oh" and took the passenger seat. As she fastened her seatbelt, Robert also got in. Judith watched as he pulled and buckled the seatbelt with his left hand in one smooth, effortless motion, followed by the sound of the car engine starting. She thought she ought to say something at this moment. "I kind of miss Noah. He really talks a lot," she asked. "Is singing at the bar your side job?" Robert kept his eyes on the road while driving. "No, it's just a hobby." Judith let out an "oh," feeling the conversation had gone cold again. To everyone's surprise, the usually reticent Robert continued, "This will most likely be the last time." Judith turned her face to look at him, noticing the silver ear stud on his ear, and suddenly remembered how he appeared on stage, bold, unrestrained, and brimming with vitality. She felt it was such a pity. "Why is that?" Robert didn't remain silent for long. With a light scoff, he said, "They're going back to their hometown to look for work." Judith pressed her lips together. She had never experienced the hardships of life, nor did she understand them as deeply as Robert did. Anything she could say felt too hollow, too preachy. The passion and ease they showed on stage were also genuine. She took a soft breath in, then exhaled gently, saying, "They're all incredibly capable people. Their lives will be just fine in the future." Robert drove while stealing glances at her. Momentarily stunned by the genuine light in her eyes, he suddenly smiled. It was faint, but utterly sincere. "What about me?" Judith parted her lips, never expecting this turn of events. "You're quite remarkable yourself." After a brief respite, it was back to the relentless pursuit of academic research. Lately, Judith had been crossing paths more often with her neighbor Robert, borrowing ingredients like oil, salt, vinegar from each other. Sometimes Judith would experiment with new recipes, and if she made too much, she'd send him a portion. As the temperature gradually cooled, Robert and Noah would invite her over to share hot pot together. Time flew by, and before they knew it, winter had arrived in Philadelphia. Christmas and New Year's Judith passed in a blur with only a few days off. They were over after just a few nights' sleep. It was late January, approaching the Chinese New Year. The weather was freezing, and with the heating on, Judith felt so drowsy she wished she could stay curled up in bed all day. Around noon, Judith received a video from a girl she used to work with in the student council. The camera first focused on her own face, then panned to reveal Ellis and Marsha in the video. The lighting in the video was dim, as if it were taken in a KTV. Judith recognized several familiar faces. It must have been a student council gathering. After a long time apart, Marsha and Ellis were sitting together, their posture not particularly intimate, with a faint hint of Ellis's reluctance still visible. Judith thought, it seems Marsha still prefers Ellis after all, ultimately choosing him between the two men. The volume in the video suddenly increased. Marsha turned down so many suitors for senior Ellis. "She's waited for you this long. Don't you owe her a clear answer?" It sounded like Marsha's friend was standing up for her. Marsha shyly tried to stop her. Ellis showed no change in expression. He raised his glass, took a sip of wine, and said calmly, "What confirmation? I only consider Marsha a friend. Senior, are you still hung up on your ex-girlfriend? How is Marsha any worse than her? She's more interesting, prettier." Ellis stood up. Judith couldn't make out his expression, but she saw him hurl his glass to the ground. The sound of the shattering glass was deafening, and all the background noise in the video instantly ceased. It was only then that Judith noticed the engagement ring on Ellis's hand, and his voice came through clearly from the video. "What ex-girlfriend? That's my wife, dumbass." On the other side of the video, Judith twitched the corner of her mouth. She typed back, "Ellis has finally gone crazy from being a lawyer." Judith couldn't quite put her feelings into words. But to say she felt nothing would be a lie. The memory of Ellis telling her "don't you regret this" a few months ago was still quite vivid. "What kind of nonsense is this now?" a friend quickly replied. "I originally wanted to vlog my last student council event, but ended up recording some juicy drama instead." Judith felt her fingers go numb. She tapped her phone screen, momentarily at a loss for words. The phone kept vibrating as more messages from her friend poured in. "I've seen Ellis a few times over the past half year. He used to come back to the student council mostly for Marsha, but recently that hasn't been the case. To be honest, the guy is still ruggedly handsome, but he seems to be living quite half-heartedly. He's really not doing well without you." Judith responded with 6 ellipsis points, then added, "You're insane, friend. He does seem a bit unhinged." After the brief interlude in her busy life, Judith continued to bury herself in work. Across the ocean, her grandfather was extremely displeased that Judith wasn't coming home for the new year and called to scold her. Judith hurried to explain, "Grandpa, it's not that I don't want to come back, it's just that the first year of grad school just started, and there's so much to do. Our advisor is a workaholic too. We only got Christmas Day itself as a holiday." Her grandfather coughed a few times, as if forcibly holding something back, but Judith didn't notice anything unusual. The old man said, "Fumage, leaving an old man like me alone in the country for New Year's, and now you're still making excuses." Judith could practically picture the old man's expression, flaring his beard and glaring. She laughed helplessly, her voice tinged with guilt. "Don't be angry. I'll fly back to keep you company the moment I get any vacation time. All right, and it's not as pitiful as you make it sound. The entire villa community back home is full of your mahjong buddies." Grandpa gave her a few more words of advice before reluctantly hanging up the phone. Time flew by, and before she knew it, it was already early February. These days, she spent her time reviewing research materials, preparing reports, and creating current and projected trend charts. On top of that, she had to translate an economics paper by a Spanish scholar into English, keeping her so busy she barely had time to catch her breath. When things piled up, Judith would have trouble sleeping at night. Lying awake for hours on end, eventually, she switched from U.S. time zones back to China's, living a life of reverse day and night. During a rare moment of respite, Judith checked her phone to find it was already 2 a.m. on Lunar New Year's Day. Judith rubbed her temples, threw on a padded coat, and headed out. Her eyes were exhausted, and she planned to buy some coffee to stay awake. Walking down the street, she felt somewhat relieved that Country M didn't celebrate the Spring Festival. Being far away in a foreign land with almost no festive atmosphere for the Spring Festival meant she wouldn't feel too intense a longing for home. Judith stepped out of the coffee shop holding an iced Americano. She hadn't noticed earlier she'd accidentally ordered it iced instead of hot. The late winter wind in Philadelphia made the coffee in her hands feel icy to the touch. Judith yawned and shuffled her way home. Just as she reached the courtyard gate, she ran into her neighbor Robert, whom she hadn't seen in nearly a month. A black turtleneck sweater paired with a khaki coat. With black pants, he was dressed casually, yet his great physique made him stand out. Judith thought, "This guy must be in great shape, he doesn't even need a winter coat." Moving closer, she caught a faint whiff of alcohol on him. Probably out for dinner with friends. Robert was also discreetly observing the woman before him. She wore a fluffy white coat, white pajama pants, and her face was pale too. The only black thing about her was her hair, with some stray strands sticking up at the crown, like a defenseless little animal. Robert frowned. But from her personality to her appearance, she really shouldn't have anything to do with what he had in mind. Judith was puzzled but waved first to greet. "Hi, what a coincidence." Robert nodded. "Good evening." The two walked into the building together without speaking further. Her neighbor was indeed the quiet type. Judith didn't feel awkward, but rather sensed a certain pressure standing beside this person. She wasn't quite comfortable with the silence, so she started making small talk. "I remember your group's small project should be finished by now. Why haven't you returned home?" Professor Philip had some acquaintance with the professor from Robert's group, and sometimes the two groups would hold joint meetings. Judith had heard some rumors about their progress. Robert lazily lifted his eyelids and said, Can't blend in with the family vibe, can't be bothered to go back. Judith nodded in understanding. What about you? Still out this late? Robert tilted his chin slightly. Judith raised her coffee cup and replied. Ran into a minor issue with the team's research. Been burning the midnight oil lately. Robert nodded. No wonder. The man spoke little, but inwardly thought, no wonder he hadn't seen her during the day recently. He'd assumed she'd returned to her home country, but it turned out she'd been keeping nocturnal hours to focus on her studies. Meanwhile, Judith, seeing his expression of disinterest in conversation, didn't force small talk either. In the elevator, she took a sip of iced coffee and shivered from the cold. Robert took it all in without a word, the corners of his lips curling slightly. The two walked down the hallway one after another, pausing again at opposite doors. Judith turned to say goodbye, only to find the man behind her watching her too. His expression remained as inscrutable as ever. Judith, yet she detected a hint of hesitation in it. She asked, "What's wrong?" Lowering his eyelids to look at her, he asked, "Want to come to my place for dumplings? I happened to buy some earlier." Robert couldn't quite explain this sudden whim either. Perhaps it was a sense of shared hardship. Coincidentally, both of them happened to be from the same city in China, so why not spend the spring festival together? Judith pinched her coffee cup, feeling inexplicably nervous. Sure. The two entered the house together. The heater Robert turned on worked perfectly, instantly filling the room with warmth. Judith felt a bit hot and took off her coat, revealing a white sweater underneath. Robert removed his trench coat and went straight into the kitchen. From the living room sofa, Judith could see a small corner of the kitchen. I could also see Robert's half-profile, his eyes lowered, lost in thought. The range hood was on, carrying away the smoke he exhaled. He looked somewhat forlorn. The dumplings cooked quickly. Robert brought them out and placed them on the coffee table, along with soy sauce, vinegar, and chili. There used to be Noah around, but this was the first time the two of them were having a meal alone. Judith tightened her grip on the chopsticks, but being in a foreign land, having someone to celebrate the new year with felt rather nice. Amid the rising steam, she looked into Robert's eyes and smiled, her eyes curving. Happy New Year, Robert. Robert was momentarily stunned, feeling an indescribable sense of relief coursing through his entire body. He also chuckled softly. Happy New Year, Judith. It was March, the early spring of Philadelphia. Outside, heavy rain was pouring down, with bean-sized raindrops pounding against the window panes. Outside, it was cold and desolate, but inside, the heating was ample and cozy. A layer of white mist formed on the windows, as if it could shut out the heavy rain outside. When it was cold, Judith always felt drowsy. Wrapped in a blanket, she read documents on the sofa, feeling utterly lethargic. As the blue and green lines on her computer screen turned into a tangled mess in her eyes, a phone call startled Judith awake. She thought it was Teacher Philip, but upon picking up, it turned out to be Ellis. The name felt both familiar and strange. In her busy life, she'd had no time to dwell on past matters. Now seeing it, she truly felt as if a lifetime had passed. Judith hesitated for a moment before answering the call. She adopted a businesslike tone. "Hello, what is it?" The person on the other end remained silent, but the sound of heavy rain was clearly audible. Judith had a sudden thought and walked to the window, where she could see two blurry headlights in the distance. She instinctively opened the window. The cold air rushed in, dispersing some of the warmth inside the room. Judith shivered and saw Ellis standing by the car in the rain, which jolted her fully awake. Feeling utterly baffled, she asked, "What are you doing here?" The sound of rain on the phone merged with the rain outside the window. After a long pause, she finally heard Ellis's hoarse voice on the other end. "Judith, it's me who's regretting." Robert was hosting a small gathering at home to celebrate the completion of a research project phase. Unable to resist the enthusiastic toasting from his senior classmates, he and Noah slipped away to the kitchen for a smoke. Noah suddenly pointed out the window and said, "Hey, Robert. Isn't that our little neighbor?" Robert followed his gaze downstairs and saw Judith holding a large black umbrella, which had just been knocked from her hands by the man in front of her. In the pitch-black night, under the streetlight, he could see Judith's face glowing pale white. Everyone was busy, and he hadn't seen Judith for some days. Judith's expression was calm, appearing familiar with the handsome man standing before her. The man stepped forward and grabbed Judith's shoulder. Robert took a drag of his cigarette and averted his gaze. Noah exclaimed in shock, "Good heavens, what is that man trying to do?" In the blink of an eye, the man actually cupped Judith's face and forcefully kissed her. Robert remained silent, his heart also tightening. Noah widened his eyes in surprise, then clicked his tongue twice as if it were routine. "Seems like emotional entanglements. A beautiful woman without some persistent suitors would be strange." Robert lost his mood for smoking and walked over to close the window. He sneered expressionlessly, "Don't meddle in other couples' affairs." Robert rejoined the party outside, but noticed that about 10 minutes later, there were sounds of a door opening and closing from across the way. He cared so much it was driving him mad. About 10 minutes earlier, downstairs, Judith held an umbrella, slightly frowning as she looked at Ellis before her. Ellis, did you come all the way to Country M just to get drenched in the rain? Her words carried no hostility. She genuinely found it baffling. Before her stood Ellis, not in formal attire but wearing a loose black shirt. His hair had grown somewhat long, damp, nearly covering his eyes completely. The corner of his mouth showed severe inflammation, the wound left unattended, as if faintly oozing blood. You could tell he'd been going through the motions these days. Judith couldn't quite describe the look in his eyes at that moment, gloomy, yet not entirely so. Ellis also found his own behavior utterly inexplicable. He'd abruptly quit his perfectly good job back home, then on a wild impulse transferred flights to make the long journey all the way to Philadelphia, standing in the heavy rain without an umbrella beneath Judith's building, just to catch a glimpse of her. Even, deep down, hoping she would change her mind, over a year ago, he had told her not to regret breaking off their engagement, yet now, the one filled with regret was himself. Ellis's Adam's apple bobbed as he uttered with difficulty, "I've missed you." Judith raised an eyebrow. "I see, thank you, I've come down. You've seen me, now you can leave." Judith didn't want to engage with him further. Having said that, she turned around and prepared to walk away. But then Ellis's damp hand grabbed her shoulder, forcibly turning her around to face him. He spoke through gritted teeth. "Judith, how could you be so heartless?" The umbrella slipped from his grasp. The heavy rain and low temperature left Judith thoroughly drenched and furious. "When you were getting close with Marcia, did you ever stop to think about what you were doing?" With that, Judith bent down to pick up the umbrella. Her indifference completely snapped the last thread of reason in Ellis's mind. He grabbed her wrist, leaned in, pinched her chin, and sealed her lips with his own. Judith felt the pressure on her lips amidst unsteady footsteps. In their 2 years together, Ellis had never initiated a kiss, let alone displayed such intense emotion, leaving her utterly dazed by the sudden passion. His grip was forceful, the hand beneath her chin pressed hard, and the one cradling the back of her head was just as unyielding. The forced kiss now made Judith resist with all her might. She felt uncomfortable, even nauseated. Ellis's split lip oozed blood, and in that moment, Judith tasted the metallic tang of it flooding her mouth. Only then did she snap back to reality. Struggling violently yet utterly unable to push away the Ellis before her, Judith bit down hard on Ellis's tongue, which only made him pause his movements. The taste of blood in her mouth grew stronger, and she clenched her brow tightly. Judith hardened her heart and raised her hand to press against the wound at the corner of his mouth. Ellis, the cut at the corner of his mouth split completely open, blood streaming down his chin and onto his neck. Judith, her eyes were wide open, staring directly at him with fury and defiance. Ellis, stung by that gaze, his grip loosened. Judith, seizing the opportunity, she shoved him away violently. "Ellis, stop acting crazy, it's disgusting." His face was covered in both blood and water, looking utterly disheveled, hanging his head. He murmured, "Before, you would never have let me get hurt." Judith wiped her mouth roughly and bent to pick up the umbrella. "You know that was before." She had initially turned to leave with her umbrella, but Ellis looked so utterly disheveled that she couldn't help asking, "Did you book a hotel?" The man shook his head silently. Judith choked up, then gritted her teeth and pressed on. "Did you come straight from the airport?" He nodded silently again. Judith felt helpless, not out of soft-heartedness, but simply thinking she shouldn't argue with a fool in a foreign land. She sighed and said, "Forget it, come on up." Ellis followed behind her, asking hoarsely, "Aren't you afraid I might do something to you?" Judith emphasized her words, "You need my help now, so don't make such assumptions. Think about your future before doing anything like this. We haven't reached a life-or-death relationship yet. I don't want you going back sick later, making our affair public knowledge. That would be extremely embarrassing." With that, Judith ignored him, walking ahead under her umbrella. Her current attitude made Ellis feel increasingly uncomfortable. But then he thought, Judith still cared enough to check on him. That meant there was still a chance, didn't it? The two of them climbed the stairs in silence. Judith could hear boisterous laughter coming from the room next to hers. Seemed like Robert was having a far more carefree night than she was. Earlier, she'd even considered asking him for advice if she couldn't finish her thesis tonight. As it turned out, both of them had their own matters to attend to. Ellis also heard the commotion next door, frowned, and asked, "Is the soundproofing here this bad?" Judith unlocked the door and calmly shut him down with a reply, "Don't worry about it, you're only staying for one night." The door opened, and a warm, inviting fragrance wafted out from inside. Ellis suddenly felt an uncontrollable sting in his nose. It had been a year. Judith's scent still lingered in his memory, yet the home they once shared together no longer carried her fragrance. Judith took out a pair of men's slippers from the shoe cabinet and placed them by the door. "Come in." Ellis immediately looked displeased. "You're giving me slippers that someone else has worn." Judith was speechless upon hearing this and retorted, "Young master, you really lack common sense. These are essentials for a woman living alone. Stop being so paranoid." Even though she mocked him, Ellis surprisingly didn't mind at all. He followed Judith inside. The house was Judith decorated very cozily, with warm yellow lighting, warm-toned ornaments. And even the soft cloth draped over the sofa had adorable patterns. Her style hadn't changed at all. Judith noticed his gaze and narrowed her eyes. "You're completely soaked, don't sit on the sofa. Take a chair." Ellis once again realized with painful clarity that while her attitude remained unchanged, the relationship between them had already become unrecognizable. He silently sat down on the chair by the dining table. Judith first went to the sink to rinse her mouth, spitting out all the bloody taste before she felt somewhat better. Ignoring Ellis on the chair, she went straight into the room to get a towel. Judith first took off her wet clothes, dried her body, and changed into a thick fleece jacket before finally feeling a bit warmer. Her hair was very wet, so she took a towel and placed it on her head. In the living room, Ellis closed his eyes, physically exhausted but mentally wide awake. For over 20 years, his life had been too smooth. Wealth and talent were innate, and anything he desired was within easy reach. Yet his marriage stemmed from an old family arrangement, and initially, he had no particular thoughts about it. Judith fulfilled all his family's expectations and was considerate enough. Yet she was too gentle and uneventful. Later he met Marcia, finding her vivid and lively, like a fresh infusion of blood into his tranquil life. He even vied with another man, Judith's best friend, for the same woman, just to preserve that radiance. But not until Judith disappeared from his life did Ellis realize how precious her unreserved affection truly was. It seemed like Judith was chasing after him, but in truth, he had long been unable to live without her. No one else could give him the feeling of home like she could. Later, he often returned to the empty, lifeless house at Jinyuan. Ellis sometimes closed his eyes and could almost hear her bustling in the kitchen, the rhythmic chopping on the cutting board, and soon after, the gentle hum of the washing machine starting up. In just a moment, Judith would slice the fruit, skewer it with toothpicks, and bring it to his lips. She would say, "The fruit vendor said the peaches are very sweet today. Try one." Judith truly carried no airs of a pampered young lady, devoting herself wholeheartedly to his well-being. Yet when he opened his eyes in response, he found nothing, only the same empty home staring back at him. The sense of disparity was almost driving him to the brink of collapse. For the first time, he realized how longing could utterly break a person. Now, nearly a year after their separation, his life had fallen into complete disarray. He could no longer hold back and immediately booked a flight to see her. Judith rummaged through the room and found a brand new towel, then walked up to him and handed it over. "Go take a shower. I'll order you a set of men's clothes later." Ellis didn't take it. After a dazed pause, he pulled the Judith before him into an embrace. Her waist was so slender that he could encircle it tightly with one arm. Ellis wrapped his arms around her with both hands, pressing his head against her abdomen, where he could hear the clear rhythm of her heartbeat. The Judith before him remained calm, lowering her eyelids to look at him, neither resisting nor showing the slightest tenderness. "Ellis, let go when you've had enough." Judith gazed at him, her emotions faint and distant. Everyone experiences withdrawal symptoms when detaching from a relationship, but hers had ended long ago. At a moment known only to herself, it had already vanished without a trace. Yet Ellis seems to have only just begun. She had no intention of helping him slowly recover. No matter how forgiving one might be, there's a limit to how much warmth one can show to those who've caused harm. It's merely remnants of affection from the past that haven't completely faded. But Ellis before her answered irrelevantly, staring motionlessly at her with slightly reddened eyes. "Judith, my mouth hurts so much, I really want some soup." He looks so fragile. Judith thought somewhat indifferently. Why do people always regret only after losing something? Ellis had so many chances to mend their relationship, yet still let it reach the point of no return. Judith couldn't help but sigh. She said helplessly, "Ellis, stop being childish. We're all adults now, and must learn to face the consequences of our actions. I'm not arguing with you, but that doesn't mean you did nothing wrong. Our engagement is already null and void, and we can never go back to how things were before." Ellis said in a low voice, "I really wish you would argue with me." Judith frowned. She simply couldn't empathize with him, nor could she immerse herself in the sorrowful atmosphere he was trying to create. She looked out the window. The rain was still falling, a chaotic pitter-patter without rhythm, unbearably loud. "I was supposed to review research papers tonight. You're a lawyer, you know time is precious. Let's not waste each other's time in the future." Judith hadn't said anything particularly harsh, her tone even bordering on calm, Yet Ellis felt as if his entire heart had been pierced. Judith withdrew her gaze and lowered her eyes to look at Ellis. From now on, I won't be providing you with hot water or towels anymore. And the room is only for tonight. Ellis finally entered the bathroom. Judith felt utterly exhausted, both physically and mentally. Letting out a long sigh, she took out her phone, intending to order a suit for Ellis, only to find that major brands had all suspended their custom delivery services due to the rain. She had considered using the VIP channel, but Judith thought better of it. There was no need to trouble others in such heavy rain. Ellis going crazy shouldn't mean dragging others into overtime. That just wasn't right. Judith casually wiped her face with the towel on her head, then slung it over her shoulder before pulling open her front door. She walked across to Robert's doorstep and knocked. The lively sounds inside paused momentarily. The door soon opened from within, and Robert appeared before her. The indoor heating was strong, and he wore a blue pinstriped shirt that accentuated his figure, broad shoulders and a narrow waist clearly on display. The man lowered his head slightly, somewhat surprised by her visit. What's wrong? All the classmates in the room were eager to catch a glimpse of the beautiful neighbor of Noah's Robert they had heard so much about. But the tall figure at the door completely blocked the woman outside from view. The people inside tilted their heads, catching only glimpses of her long black hair through various cracks. Sorry to bother you. This is rather presumptuous, but could I borrow a set of your clothes? Her voice was quite pleasant, though. Robert narrowed his eyes as he noticed Judith still had traces of blood on her lips. He recalled what he had just seen, her kiss with that man in the pouring rain, lending his clothes to her boyfriend. Seeing he remained silent, Judith looked puzzled but still said, "Is it inconvenient? Then I'll ask someone else." She turned to leave but was stopped when Robert grabbed her arm. "Just a moment, wait for me." He quickly entered the room. Now that the person blocking the door was gone, the people on the sofa in the room could clearly see Robert's neighbor's appearance. A classic Eastern beauty, petite face, delicate features, slender eyebrows and round eyes, exuding a beauty that was utterly non-threatening. A few people whispered, "So this is the kind of woman Robert likes." Judith greeted them openly. "Hi, sorry to interrupt," Noah said quite enthusiastically. "No interruption at all. Want to come in and join us?" She had met Noah a few times before and was relatively familiar with him, so she smiled and nodded in acknowledgement. "No, thank you. I still have things to do at home." Just then, Robert came out holding clothes and pants. Noah recalled the scene he just witnessed downstairs and gave him a rather sympathetic look. As the Chinese saying goes, the hero dies before his triumph is complete. Before he could even confess, he discovered she already had a boyfriend. His buddy was utterly devoted, even willing to lend his own clothes. TSK. Judith had just taken the clothes when the man in front of her asked, "Do you have ginger at home?" She froze for a moment. "No." Robert's gaze darkened, his voice low. "I'll get some. You need hot ginger soup after getting caught in the rain." "Hey." Judith wanted to say it wasn't necessary, but he had already turned back inside before she could even stop him. The man carried the items and soon reached the doorway again. Judith held an armful of things, looking at him in a daze, somewhat at a loss. Robert fixed his gaze on her and asked in a deep voice, "Shall I cook for you? Would that be all right?" Robert always sought to pry out an answer. Judith hesitated before agreeing. "All right then," seeing her relent. Robert felt an inexplicable sense of relief. Judith isn't someone without boundaries. The fact that she agreed to let me come to her place, doesn't that mean there's nothing between her and that man? If they were really a couple, Judith wouldn't have let herself go to her place while her boyfriend was there. But since we've already kissed, what does this even matter? Just as Robert was about to leave, someone called out from behind, "Hey, Robert, are you really leaving like this?" Robert turned to close the door and instructed, "You guys go ahead and play first." The few people in the room exchanged glances, then quickly burst into ambiguous laughter. Who's ever seen Robert in such a distracted state before? Someone mimicked his earlier tone saying "You guys play first," then burst into laughter, putting on such a serious face. But the moment Miss Neighbor appeared, his soul was instantly captivated. The two protagonists stood at Judith's doorstep. Naturally unaware of what the neighbors were laughing about inside, Judith paid no mind and directly addressed the person beside her. "Robert, the keys are in my pants pocket." She hadn't even realized it herself. Her trust and familiarity with Robert had already surpassed what she felt toward anyone else. At this moment, she naturally didn't notice Robert behind her pausing abruptly. It wasn't until the warmth from his hand seeped through her thin pants onto her leg that she realized her words might have been somewhat inappropriate. She could have simply asked him to hold the clothes while she opened the door herself. Fortunately, Robert said nothing, sparing her further embarrassment. He didn't speak until they entered the room. Spotting the pair of men's shoes, he looked at her and asked calmly, "Is there a man in your house?" Judith didn't find the question unusual. Holding the clothes, she walked forward, Yeah, my ex went crazy and came all the way from China. The rain was too heavy, so I let him stay for the night. Ex, the word rolled off Robert's tongue. Does being an ex mean he still gets to kiss you? Judith paused mid-motion, looking up at him in surprise. You saw that? No wonder he knew she'd been caught in the rain. Robert nodded. Saw everything. My kitchen window has a perfect view of the courtyard gate downstairs. Judith parted her lips but remained speechless for a long moment. She instinctively explained, it was an arranged marriage by our families. We never had much of a connection, and now that I said I want to break off the engagement, he suddenly became like this. Robert felt the knot of frustration in his chest suddenly loosen. He let out a soft chuckle. All right, I understand. Judith saw him standing still and suddenly remembered the only pair of men's slippers in her house was already being worn by Ellis. She pointed to the floor and said, just wipe your feet on the doormat and come right in. Robert walked in, noticing he was wearing his house slippers, but didn't mind. Judith placed the clothes by the bathroom door, gave some instructions, and left the room. Afterwards, Robert and the other person entered the kitchen together. This wasn't Robert's first time visiting Judith's home, but it was his first time stepping into her kitchen. Robert couldn't quite explain this fresh feeling. Even though his own home had the same layout as hers, everything still felt novel. It was as if he had drawn just a little closer to her. Over the past year, their friendship had remained neither too deep nor too shallow, limited to academic exchanges and occasionally swapping small items like cooking ingredients or snacks. With heavy coursework and numerous tasks, he never intended to cross boundaries or develop anything with Judith. That was genuinely what he thought at first. Yet inexplicably, every time he happened to run into her when going out, his mood would inexplicably brighten. Texting her, I'd anxiously await her reply with a pang in my heart. Sometimes when talking to her, I'd yearn to inch closer, to let that faint fragrance about her grow stronger in my senses. When his partner joked he'd caught lovesickness, he scoffed in disdain. Until today, seeing her with another man, that's when he admitted it. He was indeed mad with jealousy. Before tasting the sweetness of mutual affection, he first tasted the bitterness of jealousy. Judith stood beside Robert, watching him slice ginger into pieces, then into fine shreds, neat and orderly, paired with those handsome hands of his. It was truly a feast for the eyes. She had always been the one cooking for others. This was the first time she'd seen someone prepare a meal for her. Judith praised sincerely, your knife skills are excellent. Thank you. Robert glanced at her and smiled again. What you make always smells wonderful too. Oh, really? Judith paused in surprise. I'll make you a portion sometime. Robert curved a faint smile. All right. All ingredients in the pot. Water added. Robert turned the heat to high. Before long, steam billowed from the vent of the pot lid. Judith switched on the range hood. The man beside her suddenly reached out, touching the frizzy crown of her head. Then he followed a strand of hair downward, his knuckle grazing barely there from her cheek to her chin. Her hair was very smooth, but the top was prone to sticking up. Judith froze for a moment, feeling an intensely noticeable itch where his finger had touched. She thought her face must be very red right now. What are you doing? Robert curved his lips, his gaze unexpectedly gentle. It just suddenly occurred to me that having someone else in the kitchen with me doesn't feel like they're in the way. Really? Judith also touched the top of her head. It has to be the right person. Though, it is the right person. Judith had merely echoed his words, yet hearing him repeat them made her feel there was an underlying meaning to his remark. She lowered her eyes and fell silent, staring absently at the transparent pot lid, before the ginger soup could finish simmering. Ellis emerged from the bathroom. As the two stood by the stove, they heard the angry voice of the person behind them. Judith, who is he? Judith remained unfazed by his anger and calmly introduced to Robert, this is Ellis. My friend. She then reached out and introduced the man beside her to Ellis. This is my neighbor, Robert. Robert nodded and added, yeah, the clothes you're wearing are mine. Ellis looked even more displeased and didn't respond. The two men were sizing each other up. In the silence, the ginger tea finished brewing. The pot let out a ding, shattering the quiet in the room. Judith, however, didn't seem bothered. She bent down to retrieve 3 bowls from the sterilizer. She thought of something else, raised her face and asked the Robert beside her, will you drink? Robert pondered for a moment before saying, sure. Judith filled 3 bowls and placed them on the dining table. The round table was perfect. She thought, no need to agonize over who should sit next to whom. Ellis watched them interact and get along as if no one else was around, feeling utterly miserable inside. Judith had no interest in the twists and turns of his thoughts and called out, come over and have some soup. Ellis obediently went over and sat down. Judith found his unusually docile demeanor quite peculiar and took a few extra glances at him. Robert noticed but continued drinking his soup without showing any reaction. An awkward atmosphere once again surfaced among the 3 people in the room. After a long pause, Ellis finally couldn't hold back and broke the silence. He looked at Judith, his voice turning cold. How could you let another man come to your house so casually? Judith sighed, rubbing her temples wearily. Please note, you're also another man. Ellis's words were choked back again, leaving him utterly frustrated. When he looked up, he naturally didn't miss Robert's seemingly cheerful smile at the corner of his mouth. Even more frustrating, seeing Ellis finish the ginger soup, Judith hurried him inside. You'll sleep in the room next to mine. Go make your own bed, Ellis asked. Why can't we sleep together? We always used to sleep together. Robert was still drinking his soup and showed no reaction. He thought, fool, the enemy loses 1,000 while we lose 800. Judith's attitude is what matters most. Judith's attitude was exactly as Robert had imagined. She closed her eyes briefly, her patience wearing thin. Ellis, I've made myself perfectly clear. If you keep crossing the line, get out and find a hotel. If you can't behave normally, we'll just be exes who are better off not seeing each other. Ellis went to the kitchen to put away the bowl, then entered the room with a sullen expression. Judith let out a sigh of relief. She cleared the bowls and saw Robert out, at the doorstep. He looked down at Judith and said, you and him didn't seem to have an ordinary relationship before. Judith paused unnaturally in her movements before pulling the door open. Robert, even you couldn't directly admit those embarrassing things you did for love like a moth to flame, could you? Robert walked out and said calmly, I don't need to say anything. Never been in love. Oh, seeing Robert open the door, Judith prepared to close it. Unexpectedly, the man turned back and said to her, good night, call me anytime if you need anything. Judith paused for a moment before replying with feigned composure. All right, thank you. Robert smiled and said, go on in. Judith closed the door in a daze. Turning around, she found Ellis standing behind her. The man had been standing there for who knows how long, his expression grim. That neighbor of yours, he's got a thing for you. Judith was completely stunned, but quickly regained her composure. So what? That's none of your business. Ellis's expression shifted from anger to sorrow. Judith, don't be so cruel, always pushing me away. No matter how his emotions fluctuated, the sense of powerlessness in his heart remained unchanged. Judith only felt exhausted. Let me say it again, Ellis, I don't plan to have any future with you. What happened in the past is all over. I won't look back, and you should move forward too. Tomorrow morning, I expect you to leave my house. Judith might seem gentle and easygoing, but in reality, once she's made up her mind, she rarely changes it. Similarly, for Ellis, traveling thousands of miles to a foreign land in pursuit of love was already something that pushed beyond his boundaries and dignity. For two incompatible people, everything was already predestined. Before bed, Judith's phone received a message from Robert. Reach out to me promptly if anything comes up. She knew this person was afraid Ellis might go crazy at night and do something outrageous. Judith replied, thanks. I've locked the door, happy face. The next day, Judith got up very early. Soon after, Ellis also got up. Hearing the noise, Judith looked up from her computer. What would you like for breakfast? Faced with such a question, Ellis felt as if transported to another lifetime. But Judith's next words completely shattered his illusion. Please leave after you finish eating, and remember to book your return ticket. Ellis felt his eyes grow hot. Facing Judith, he always felt more vulnerable. He was about to say something when a knock at the door interrupted him. Judith stood up to answer the door and found Robert standing there. He carried 2 bowls of porridge and said, I bought 2 extra. Would you like some? Judith suddenly remembered what Ellis had said yesterday about this person having feelings for her. She raised an eyebrow. You bought extra on purpose, didn't you? To her surprise, Robert nodded frankly and said, yeah, I didn't want you making food for someone else. Some rather mushy words, when spoken by this person, actually didn't feel too bad. Judith smiled and replied meaningfully, is that so? Thank you. After breakfast, Judith watched Ellis leave through the living room window. She didn't go to see him off. What an utterly chaotic night, she thought. Any sunset is just a sunset. There's no need for anyone to travel thousands of miles to another place, to another mountain peak, just to see the sunset view. Judith took a sip of hot cocoa, averted her gaze, and stepped away from the window. Ellis seemed to have a premonition. He looked up from downstairs toward the window of Judith's room, but all he saw was Judith's figure disappearing from the window. He could finally accept that there would be no more of Judith's care in his life hereafter. It was May, the heart of spring in Philadelphia, with pleasant weather, an utterly ordinary day. Judith and Robert were reviewing literature in the library. She received a call from Judith's mom, whom she hadn't been in contact with for a long time. When it came to her mother, Judith always had mixed feelings. After a moment's hesitation, she still walked into the hallway to answer it. Judith, your grandfather is ill. Preliminary tests show lung cancer. If we're optimistic, it's in the early stages. The words hit like a sledgehammer, leaving Judith stunned. She suddenly remembered the uncontrollable coughing during their recent phone calls. Judith hadn't thought much of it at the time, assuming it was just a cold, and had urged the old man to take his medicine properly. She suddenly found it hard to forgive herself, her eyes instantly welling up with tears. "I understand, I'll hurry back as soon as possible." Robert had always scoffed at the pitiful way some friends acted when they fell for someone. Never did he imagine he'd end up the same way. Judith had only stepped away to make a phone call, yet he already missed seeing her. Robert grabbed a cigarette as camouflage and headed to the stairwell to find Judith. "I never expected to see the girl's reddened eyes the moment I pushed the door open. What happened?" Judith shed a tear in the blink of an eye. A warm presence enveloped her as she felt someone pull her into an embrace. Robert's coat had a hard button that felt icy against her, bringing her somewhat back to her senses. Muffled against his chest, she replied, "My grandfather. He's fallen ill. I need to return home for a while." Robert helped Judith book a flight home and accompanied her to pack her luggage. Judith asked for leave from Professor Philip, packing her belongings through tears. The tears seemed endless, with 2 continuous streams running down her face. Robert asked worriedly, "Will you be all right alone?" Judith silently shook her head. She never volunteered to shoulder others' emotions, nor was she accustomed to pouring out her own feelings to anyone. Robert could say no more, wiping the tears from her face. Then, unable to restrain himself, he kissed Judith's forehead. Seeing her cry always stirred in him an urge to protect her. Judith paused for a moment before silently embracing him in return, after clearing customs and transferring flights. Another 20+ hours in the air, Judith finally touched down, dragging her suitcase. She rushed non-stop to the hospital where her grandfather was. The old man lay weakly on the hospital bed, eyes closed, asleep. Hearing Judith enter the room, he quickly woke. The old man grumbled slightly, "You silly child. Listening to your mother's nonsense. What could possibly be wrong with me that you'd come back at this time?" Judith forced a smile. "It's nothing, Grandpa. I just happened to have some time off, so I came back to keep you company." Grandpa's condition was relatively optimistic. The spread wasn't extensive. After the surgery, he would need proper rest and continuous monitoring. A few days later, the hospital notified the family and scheduled the surgery for the old man. After more than 10 hours of surgery, Grandpa safely came out of the operating room. In the hallway, Judith and Judith's mom both let out a long sigh of relief. With the weight lifted from her heart, Judith closed her eyes, feeling exhausted. Beside her, Judith's mom spoke hesitantly. "Judith, would you live with Mom from now on?" Judith still had tears on her face. She lowered her eyes and remained silent. This wasn't the first time Judith's mom had brought this up, and each time, Judith had coldly rejected her. Seeing her silence, Judith's mom pressed on, "With Mom, Uncle, an older brother, and your own younger brother, our whole family together, isn't that wonderful? That's your family, not mine." The words Judith blurted out, yet the moment she saw the hurt expression on the woman's face before her, she instinctively regretted them. She knew her mother had spoken those words only out of a desire to make amends. She wanted to make up for her own sense of guilt. It was the unease of her conscience, the hypocritical opportunism that crept in. Judith thought somewhat maliciously, hoping to alleviate her own guilt this way. Now in her 20s, she could actually understand her mother's personal choice back then. She was a woman first, then a mother. It wasn't infidelity, nor betrayal. She naturally had the right to pursue her own happiness. But Judith couldn't accept why she had been abandoned so easily. Yet she was far better than other mothers who abandoned their children. She actually felt regret. Does she love me? Does my own mother truly love me? She has no idea. But Judith remembers when she was little, being with her parents. The sunlight was warm, and the air was filled with the aroma of bread wafting from the oven. Mom, wearing a little dog apron, gently tapped her nose and said tenderly, "Wait a bit, let it cool before eating. We don't want to burn off our little Judith's tongue, do we?" But she also remembered how cold the rain had been when her father passed away. Not long after, her mother left with that Robert's dad. She chased after the car. But the wind and rain were just as bitterly cold. At 5 years old, she fell to the ground, wailing, and could only watch as the car disappeared from sight. Yet now, facing her own mother, the woman who hadn't hesitated to abandon her back then, she found herself shamefully tempted by this proposal of living together. Home, a word both unfamiliar and deeply longed for. For over 20 years now, she had yearned to find such a place to belong. She had even once hoped to build a home with someone. Seeing her silence, Judith's mom hesitantly said, "Judith, I know these years, I've failed you too much." Judith cut her off. "I'll think about it some more. I should go back to country and finish my studies first. Let the bullet fly a little longer. Right now, she's too fragile, too easily swayed by such emotions." Judith's mom was overjoyed to hear her finally relent, nearly moved to tears. Good, good," she nodded repeatedly. Take your time to think it over. It's never too late to talk when you return. Judith's mom went downstairs to handle the paperwork. Judith closed her eyes, and soon heard footsteps that stopped right beside her. She opened her eyes and unexpectedly saw Robert, who should have been far away in Philadelphia. Judith felt so confused inside, yet seeing him gave her an unexpected sense of security. She stood up, but before she could say anything, she was tightly embraced by the newcomer. "Is your grandfather okay?" Judith nuzzled her head against his chest and said, "The surgery was successful." Robert's tense body relaxed as he let out a sigh. "Judith, I miss you so much." Judith didn't speak, closing her eyes as she leaned into his embrace, quietly drawing warmth from his body. Many times in moments of weakness, she had longed to see him too. "Robert, why are you with Judith?" Judith, startled by the sound, turned her head in surprise to look at Judith's mom. Robert had already guessed and showed little reaction, merely nodding slightly. "We're at the same school, and neighbors." Judith then pulled away from his embrace, puzzled and suspicious. "He is," Judith's mom replied. "He's your Robert's dad's son." Robert's dad didn't think much of it when he found out, comforting his wife by saying this would strengthen family ties and they'd be even closer relatives. A few days later, Grandpa regained full consciousness and was in good health. Judith could finally return with peace of mind to continue her studies. Judith's mom brought her lots of snacks. Judith refused somewhat stiffly. "I don't need these." Seeing Judith's mom's visibly disappointed expression, she couldn't help explaining, "These are hard to take on the plane, they might get confiscated. I'll eat them when I get back." Judith's mom's face brightened again like a delicate flower in full bloom. In the afternoon, Judith's mom leaned against Robert's dad. Seeing them off with tears, Judith didn't know if it was her own lack of sentimentality or simply being unaccustomed to such tender moments, but she felt surprisingly unmoved. As she prepared to enter the boarding gate, she noticed Judith's mom still watching her. Finally, she raised her hand and waved, "Go back now, we're leaving." Watching Judith and Robert walk away hand in hand, Judith's mom burst into even heavier tears. Robert's dad comfortingly patted his wife's shoulder. "Don't worry, Robert will take good care of Judith." After returning to Philadelphia, the two quite naturally established their relationship. Robert graduated a year earlier than her and promptly gave up the room across the hall, moving in with Judith. When checking out, the landlord said they never expected their property would help foster a romantic relationship. Robert worked while playing the role of a house husband, taking such good care of Judith that he nearly turned her into a completely dependent person. 2 years later, the couple completed their studies and returned to their home country together. Judith and Robert unexpectedly ran into Ellis and his mother while shopping at the mall, with a very demure-looking woman standing beside them. After exchanging greetings, they went their separate ways in opposite directions. After just a few steps, Judith was called back by Ellis. She and Robert stopped in their tracks, turning to see Ellis quickly approaching. He hurried to explain, "Judith, I've been waiting for you to come back. Don't wait anymore. There's no chance." Robert's face was darker than the bottom of a pot. Judith glanced at the Robert beside her and found it amusing. She actually laughed out loud. "Ellis, your mother must be very worried about your marriage now. You should go back soon." Ellis left with lingering reluctance, turning back every few steps. Robert covered Judith's eyes with his hand. "If you look at him one more time, you won't have an easy night with me." Judith kicked him, then tightly clasped his hand. All right, from now on, I'll only ever like you the most." The end.